Good morning. I'd like to call to order the, I forget what meeting it is, Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting of Thursday, October 24th. And we have an agenda in front of us. Are there any additions or deletions? I'd like to have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And first we have a presentation with Quentin and Wes from Cornerstone Planning Group about the space in our buildings. So we'll turn it over to you. What we're looking at doing is having them have the presentation as short as possible, given we've seen the presentation, we've all read the material, so that we can have enough, like a little more time for questions at the end, because I'm sure you have questions. Okay? Turn it over to you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Okay, welcome everyone. Like it was introduced, we did actually have it set up for about 20 minutes, but we'll try to keep it as short as possible. So we'll try to get down to 10 minutes and we'll see how fast we can get through it. So we're just going to have a quick review of the project goals. Then we're going to review our project approach to what's happened over the last 8 months or so. Then we're going to jump right into project findings, and so that's going to let you in on some of the findings from the report. That's current state and for what we found for future state. And then finally finish with project next steps. So jumping into project goals, so the goals of this project were to review the building and site functionality to deliver services for Field Road, Mason Road, and Lagoon Road. So 3 different sites with a number of different facilities on each of them, as you all know. Another goal was to improve worker morale by improving the workspace layout, particularly in the spaces that people are working day to day, day in and day out. So that's Field Road site particularly. Improved site efficiency, flow, and safety. This was a real focus for Mason Road site because it kind of has grown ad hoc over the years, and so it's kind of just naturally evolved into what it is today, which is not exactly the most efficient site layout. And then the last goal of the project was to prepare short and long-term concept options, and so this is really to quantify the current state in time, what's happening today, and make all the most rational assumptions going into the future and make sure that these sites can accommodate current and future growth. So our approach, what we did for this project was 5 stages of work. It started in March and we're likely to finish at the end of this month. And so the 5 different steps were baseline project information gathering, so that's reading previous documentation as well as collecting a lot of information on current state, so staffing numbers, how facilities are used, and all the different departments that are using the space. Stage 2 was stakeholder consultation, so we came out here, met with staff as well as leadership and management to have discussions as to the future state of operations on all 3 sites, so that was information collection as well. Stage 3, we took all the information that we had gathered from both the information gathering, so the background project, as well as stakeholder consultation, and started putting it together into a bit of a space plan. How we do space planning is we base it off of activities. So with a clear understanding of the activities, we come up with current state, ideal condition space requirements. And so we put together basically a space table that says, in the ideal world, for the functions that you're currently doing today, this is how much space you would require. From there, we gross that with all of the future assumptions that we've made to see what would be required in the future. From that, we'd have what's required in the future versus what's happening current state, and we'd have a bit of an idea as far as the gap that would need to be accommodated. Stage 4 of the project was conceptual designs, and so this is just really looking at a high level if the sites and the facilities were appropriate to accommodate the future demand. And so this is what we'll see in some of the project findings today. But it is important to say that these are just concept designs. By no means were they designed by an architect. We are a space planning firm, and so we really just look at the high-level net square meter area, gross area of a building to figure out if the site and facility could support the requirements going forward. Finally, in stage 5 was just to finalize the report, and we've been doing a couple different presentations. So we met, I think it was 2 weeks ago, with staff to go over the findings of the report also. So quickly, just the current state findings. So it probably is no surprise to anybody here, but Field Road facility, there is some insufficient amount of meeting space for the number of staff on site. That's the same for touchdown space, so visiting personnel. There's no receiving area. Offices are considered oversized in comparison to many other different municipalities as well as space standards. And so this is just a poor use of space. The room acoustics also are not appropriate for the types of conversations that are happening, and so that was a major concern also. HVAC control, as with all old buildings that have been renovated, HVAC is always an issue, and so that was brought up also. Shortage of staff support areas, and so these are types of spaces including change rooms, meeting spaces, breakout rooms, that sort of type of area. And then finally, lack of fire suppression in the IT building. Looking at the Mason Road facility and the site issues there, again, insufficient staff workspace for the number of staff that it's meant to support. There's no female change room in the utilities building. Lack of parking space, poor site circulation, which also causes some security concerns from a site circulation perspective. Informal meeting material storage, and so material storage or the laydown is actually scattered pretty much all over site, which is not exactly the most efficient use of space. There's department fragmentation across the site, so certain departments are spread completely from corner to corner. Shortage of appropriate indoor storage, as well as there's condemned items being stored on site that just need to be removed. So that's a bit of a snapshot of the current state. So like I said, probably nothing new to you. The only other site that's not mentioned here is Lagoon Road, and so we'll kind of address that all in one slide at the end. But just because it's such a separate function and there's only really one person working there. So future demand factors, all of this is outlined in the report which you've read, but I'll just give a quick little synopsis. So as we know that the service area and the population of the Sunshine Coast is increasing as per Stats Canada, and so that will have an impact on the amount of space needed to support the staff to support the population. Increased reliance on digital records as we move forward with technology and implementing in every day of our work, all aspects of our work. We know that digital records is actually, the long-term storage is decreasing, and so that will actually have a positive or a decrease in space impact on future planning. Increased public consultation awareness programs, and so the public is getting more and more involved with decisions that are being made at the board level. And so we know that the public consultation from working with other municipalities it does increase as we move forward in time. Aging infrastructure, so the utilities crew here that needs to support the aging infrastructure as well as the facilities. It is aging, and we're getting to a point where a lot of the different facilities and infrastructure within the district require replacement, and so that will have an impact on staff as well as storage and equipment space. There's an increased online utilities billing, and so as more services are offered to be paid online, there should be less interface happening actually within the district building, and so that will have a decrease in space impact. Individual water meters is something that's also happening on the coast, and so that will have an impact on teams that are actually required to install those meters. It'll also impact how people are paying their bills. It should be an online platform, and so that will overall be net positive, but there is a decrease in there, just assuming that most people go to online billing. The expanded public transport, we know as the population increases, more and more demand for public transport will happen, which will increase the number of vehicles that need to be stored at Mason Road, as well as the staff to actually drive them. And so that will increase space. Fleet electrification, not a huge impact on space, but we do have to consider the charging stations for fleet electrification when that does happen. And so that will be an impact on parking area. Increased utility demand as population increases and infrastructure, the utility demand will also increase, and so that is another factor. Lower carbon footprint targets, particularly around the facilities that the district manages. As you target these lower carbon footprint targets, there will need to be facility upgrades, and so particularly the facility services team will need to probably increase their workload. Then we can talk about the climate, so increasing frequency and severity of weather events. As we know, climate change is impacting all different aspects of weather, and the frequency and severity of those actual events is increasing, which has been documented, and so response to those types of weather events will likely have an impact on, one, how many staff you're actually required to do it, and the frequency of how often that happens. Additional ferry services also goes along with just the increase in population. What that all means as far as staff growth, so we took into consideration all of those different planning factors, as well as took a realistic approach where we sat down with different district department leaders, and we said what is the best estimate in the short term versus long term. And to define short term versus long term in our eyes was 5 years or less. Long term is 10 years or less. And so at Field Road in particular, they said that we could have about a net of plus 11 employees over the 5 years and plus 16 over the long term. So that's a 14 and a 21% increase from today. For Mason Road, short term, it was plus 13 employees, and long term would be plus 16. 17 and 21% growth. When we start to look at the actual concepts, on the left-hand side is the short-term strategy, which makes use of the existing building walls, trying to minimize the amount of renovations and disruption. And so what we've done here is that there's a lot of single office occupancy today. The plan really tries to optimize the amount of office space that is available, so floor area today, which basically if there's offices with single people in it, we've tried to double them up. And we've tried to make better use of the existing space to provide more staff support areas, such as change rooms, breakout rooms, and meeting rooms. Because we know as the staff increases, it's not just finding them a seat to sit, it's also finding them space to function as their day-to-day activities, which is really, they need meeting space in each touchdown, as well as change rooms and staff support areas, lunch rooms, and that sort of thing. This plan also increased the number of additional touchdown workstations. And so this plan itself, although it's only an increase of, I think, 14% in the short term, it still was not able to accommodate all of the different personnel projected, and that is including using the IT building outside as 100% as an office space. So the shortage on this plan was about 100 net square meters of space. And that was really in the staff support area. So this could accommodate all the different staff, bottoms and seats, but it could not accommodate the staff support areas. It also assumes in the short term that all of the park staff move to Mason Road site, so they can be consolidated as a department, and just because there's a lack of available space here. In the long-term option, we assumed that there was a complete interior renovation, and that all the walls could be removed, and we could make the space into more of an open office plan layout. The model that we used the space standards that we used to model this option was Workplace 2.0, which assumes that it's pretty much on the scale of office standards. It's one of the more aggressive ones. It's what the federal government uses today for open office plan, but it assumes that each person gets about 4.5 square meters of space for an open plan workstation. There are still a number of offices within this plan, as well as closed door spaces, but just for an overall snapshot, it just shows the areas in bulk. So the red on the right-hand side is the staff support area, and so you can see in comparison to the yellow on the left-hand side, there's quite a bit more red, which means that to support the group, you do actually need quite a bit more of that staff support space. Again, this option assumes that Parks moves to Mason Road site, and the IT building is used for office space. The cost estimate for both of these options, again, Class D, so it's fairly high level, plus or minus 30%, $1.125 million for the short term, and the long term option is $5.715 million. When we look at Mason Road site short term, again, we tried to minimize the amount of actual disruption to the site. This one really focuses with the transit and fleet building has an interior renovation to increase the amount of staff workspaces, as well increase the efficiency there. It also includes a renovation to the utilities facility. And to support the additional staff that we know already have a shortfall in space, we've applied a temporary trailer for utilities. That would be for the staff support space for utilities, and so that's a change room for male and female as well as a lunchroom. This option would also try to consolidate laydown as well as parking, and so on the bottom left-hand corner of the site, all the staff parking would be located there, and on the bottom right-hand corner, all of the utilities laydown would be consolidated. This is kind of the first step in the long-term strategy, where you need to start consolidating different types of space as well as activities, and remove all of the condemned items that are on site. There's no change to the actual circulation of the site with this option, and so it's still a major concern as far as safety goes, is where the cars are entering and exiting. Again, Class D estimate for this one is $5.7 million, and with the major caveat that this has a significant risk associated because we know it's a leased site. The long-term options were divided into 3 different variations. The first variation assumes that all of the existing services that are provided at Mason Road will be provided in the future, and that you're fixed to the same size of piece of land. So this one assumes that there's complete site redevelopment. As you can see, there's a new facility in the top left-hand corner, so that's the proposed utilities, parks, and building maintenance facility. That would be a 2-story facility with shops in the ground floor and office space on top. This builds on the previous plan for the transit and fleet facility. So the renovations that happen in the first phase, or the short term, would still apply to the long-term strategy in this case, with the exception of you are building on an additional work bay, proposed wash bay, and adding 2 more maintenance bays. The laydown is consolidated to one location, so that's the center area of the yard. That does assume that there are some more efficient laydown storage devices used, so racking storage, so you can take advantage of some of the vertical space rather than just all the ground space. That only applies to certain types of material, but it can be done successfully. This also assumes that all transit fleet parking remain parked on site. And so all the different little boxes on the bottom right-hand corner there, those are the different types of buses that you will have in the future as per the transit master plan. And those allowances assume that they are electrified, and so they're quite generous allowances as far as the amount of space per vehicle. On the left-hand side, all of the staff and fleet parking is consolidated. So the idea is that staff and fleet will bring their vehicle in through the left-hand side, which is Mason Road, and they can go straight into staff and fleet parking, and they can leave out the south portion of the site, Wigward Road. That is to make sure that there's one-way flow through the site to avoid congestion and it improves site circulation. The arrow on the top left-hand corner is where it's envisioned that the transit and fleet will enter. So their flow will be straight through the top. I don't know if I can show you with my mouse. Yep, I can. So transit and fleet would enter through the top of the site. If they are going to any maintenance, they can enter through the maintenance bays here or the proposed wash bay, and then they park before leaving, fueling up and leaving the site. So the idea is that everybody enters through the top and exits through the south to attain that one-way circulation. This option is $25.9 million, Class D estimate, plus or minus 30%. The second option assumes that some of the services are actually moved off-site. So as mentioned in the transit master plan, one of the considerations should be that some of the buses are actually moved and parked off-site, closer to where they're actually delivering services. And so this option assumes that a portion of the transit vehicles are actually parked at another location, which frees up some of the site area. So again, this assumes that there's a new utilities parks building built. It's the same expansion on the transit and fleet. Laydown space has been moved over to the right-hand side, transit and fleet parking into the middle, fuel island at the south portion of the site, and staff and fleet parking in the same area. The real benefit with this option is that where there was very little room for growth or any sort of change in the previous option, this does free up some more space on the existing site for growth. $25.5 million for this option. The final long-term strategy for Mason Road assumes that you are able to procure some additional land on the neighboring site. And so this is the most flexible option in the sense that you do have more flexibility in the future to potentially do some changes to the site, but you would need to procure additional land. So staff parking is moved off-site. The remaining functions on the site remain the same. Another thing important to note about all 3 of these different options is that the septic field, which is right over here currently, it assumes that the entire site is developed and there's a new septic system put in, as well as what's that building called?
Electrical switch.
Thank you. The electrical switch building is also moved. So this also does have the separation of flow for circulation, with the main difference between this and the other options is that staff parking is moved off-site. And that is assumed that staff parking would remain as surface level parking. This option is the most expensive option with the additional land, so that's $28.2 million. sorry, not the additional land. Land costs are not included in any of these different options. That would just be for the development of the additional area. So just as a costing summary, Field Road was between $1 and about $6 million, whereas Mason Road can range between 5.7 and 28 million, depending on the option. Lagoon Road, this is where I'll touch upon what happened there. So Lagoon Road, as we know right now, is providing very few actual day-to-day functions. It's primarily being used as a site for laydown and additional material storage. It's also being used as a function to pay utilities bills. So there's one staff there, I think 3 days a week. Our strategy for Lagoon Road, or suggestion, was that in the short term, that one person that is taking care of the utilities billing moves over to Mason Road site, and in the long term, review how that site is actually being used for material storage. Although it may be a bit of an ideal location for material storage, it may not be used enough to justify the cost of keeping that area. And so that is what I've prepared thus far. The next steps moving forward, obviously this is just a snapshot in time, and so we really planned using information that was available up until about July, August. Before anything else happens, you should update this plan just to make sure that the assumptions were still valid and no changes have been made to the staffing estimates. Then you'd need to get into detailed planning, and so that's where you'd probably figure out exactly how many offices and workstations are required. That would generally be done with a architect consultant. Following that would be business case, so you'd have a slightly better idea of costing, so you could probably go to Class C costing at that point before you jump into design and then finally construction. And so now we can jump into some questions. I'm sure everyone's got a long list, so let's dive in.
Thank you for the presentation. And I'll look to directors. Who wants to lead off? Director McMahon.
Yeah, I do have lots of questions, but the order of this, because I noticed that the Field Road plan calls for the park staff to be moved. In that case, that suggests that Mason Road has to go first. Would that be logical?
Not exactly how we planned it. We assumed that in the short term for Mason Road that there would be a trailer provided for park staff. Right now there's a real shortage of administration space for parks team at the Mason Road, and with the shortage that we know that's going to happen at Field Road, we assume that in the short term, so the 5 years or less, that there's a trailer put over there for them to work from. And so it wouldn't necessarily say that Mason Road has to start for this.
And next, Director Beamish.
Just a question. What is the area of the Mason Road site? Do you know?
I don't have that number off the top of my head. Do you remember right now?
It's about 2 hectares.
2 hectares. And it's just kind of a out of left field, but I wonder if there's any sense in the longer term planning to look at co-hosting a site on the Dusty Road site with the addition of Seashell. It's also looking at upgrading facilities and looking at combining some sense of combining services. You've got about, as I recall, about 8 acres over there.
Yes.
And you know, if you're going to get into new construction and everything else like that, why isn't it kind of one project and sharing of space and get away from a lease of a private owner and get into a lease of a government owner? And just a thought.
That's a great idea. We should pursue that. We're in the process right now, and I think we're working with Cornerstone as well, right?
Yeah.
And we were just presented with the information for our requirements for a Public Works and Parks facility on that site. There is room. Yeah. Director Hills.
Yeah, I'll follow up with that. My understanding is that this might be a staff question, there is a business case discussion going on about whether the Field Road site is a viable site, because I understand that the lease expires in 2022, a 30-year lease from 1992 to Mason Road, sorry. So I'm not sure if that's a staff question about the business case regarding Field Road and its long-term viability. Mason Road, sorry.
Yes.
Mason Road.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that is the major risk with Mason Road development. Obviously, from our perspective, that decision had not been made from staff currently, but the requirements that we've laid out for space could be applied to any site. So in the event that you do decide to divest of your lease and potentially move on to the District of Seychelles land, it still would give you the same sort of facility requirements. The only other consideration would be the consolidation factor, so which would definitely have space efficiencies because it's very similar activities happening from both sites.
Director Hiltz.
So to staff, is there a business case analysis going on the Field Road site now, or Mason Roads? Why do I? Mason.
You're hung up on Field Road. Yeah.
Mason Road business case site.
That over to staff.
So staff haven't begun to research that information. I think this is just the conclusion of the plan. So we were well aware of the lease. So I think we wanted to do this particular project to be able to answer whether or not that space could even was even feasible to continue to renew it. So now we know the answer. But again, it's a snapshot in time, and it doesn't preclude us from exploring other options. But there's some advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons to having a lease site. But that would be the next step for us to see whether or not we could secure a long term, and even explore the adjacent property with the province. So now that we know what we know now, that would be the next step.
Director Tice.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to some further discussions about the lease opportunities, but I'm guessing that will probably be in camera. There's having some experience with fleets and from my business background, I really like the idea of moving the fleet to as close to the service that's being provided as possible, because it, in the long run, it saves a lot of staff time of having to move the vehicles from Mason Road to wherever they need to be providing their service, as well as wear and tear on the fleet. So where ideally would another fleet yard be located? And that might be that's one question. And then looking at hourly ferry service, and me thinking when things are going to escalate in price fairly quickly, real estate wise, that securing those kind of premises would be done better now than in a few years' time when things go through the roof. So just some thoughts.
And staff.
Thank you. Currently, all routes, all bus service start in Seychelles. So currently there is a close connection between our Mason Yard facility and the place where all the routes start. In terms of expansion of the fleet service, of the transit service, there's discussion about expanding the routes on the lower coast, especially with increased ferry service. There might be an option to see if there can be a depot on the south coast, southern side of the coast in Gibson area, and that would allow then to have some bus routes starting there and also finishing there, because there's talk about Route 5, and that would maybe allow those buses to be parked over there and do a more local route there.
Director Pan, and then we'll go to Director Lee.
Okay, I noticed that both sites, Field Road and Mason Road, a lot of the site is taken up with parking. Are there ways to mitigate this? Because, we are basically subsidizing everybody to drive their vehicle to work every day.
Yeah, so from our perspective, that is a big flag for us. And until the district, or if the district does decide to have some sort of parking policies in place where carpooling is actually recommended, there's other alternative ways to get to work, obviously, via bike and that sort of thing. Where it's located right now is a little bit off the beaten path, per se, and so I can understand why most staff do drive there. But to eliminate parking more than probably 80% of staff, I'd say is pretty unrealistic given the location of where it currently is. It does take up a lot of area of site. The only other option to address that would be potentially to build parkade, which increases the cost dramatically. And so unless the district is willing to have some pretty aggressive parking and getting to work policy, I don't see any way around decreasing in that shorter than 80% of overall total number of staff. Here too, yeah.
Director Lee?
Couple of things. Well, thank you first half. A couple of things is I think that the regional district is kind of going backwards from where general business is in this world. Work from home has been greatly encouraged, and it's resulted in less staff space pretty much through all large businesses. And we ourselves have become a large business here. So we need to consider that, I believe. And when you do consider that, it does dramatically affect the space needed. So I know that's not within your view, but I think before we make any decisions on business space, we need to understand productivity gains in our business and then work on the space. So I'd like to see us do that. And I got more comments, but I'll let someone else.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Sure, I'll take one, thanks. It's about the cost estimate. So I saw 20%, I heard 30%.
Sorry, it is whatever's on the slide.
20%?
Yeah, so our cost estimator sometimes uses 20 or 30 Class D.
So I'm trying to understand, like, usually we hear Class D is plus or minus 40%.
I know. Yeah.
And I understand that there wasn't, like, record drawings for the Field Road site.
Mm-hmm.
There's more understanding about the Mason Road site, perhaps, than the Field Road site. So how the known information about the existing facility affects those cost estimates?
Right. So how our cost estimator is able to get to the plus or minus 20 versus the plus or minus typically 40% up to 50% for Class D is that there's a lot more inclusions within his analysis, and so he includes for design contingencies, a few soft costs, and so that includes some of the consultant work as well as planners and that sort of thing. And so it is a little bit more detailed than typical Class D, and that's how he's been able to decrease his plus or minus range. As far as the available information, there was more available information for Mason Road as far as drawings on records, but keep in mind that all of these estimates were done based on a cost per square foot basis. And so we broke down to building shell type, and so the industrial shell type versus the office shell type will have a different cost per square foot for this area, and so he uses historical information to actually do the cost estimate. And so the record of drawing areas, as long as we're within a ballpark of the actual facility sizes, it won't have too much of an impact. Yeah.
We'll go back to Director Lee, and then we'll come to Director.
I'd like to speak in favor of warehouse consolidation as well. That's a very common practice in business. If you have warehouse consolidation, you get a bigger site to move stuff around and bigger receiving areas and a better organization of materials. So I think it's a great idea, Seashelt and the SCRD.
Director Ties?
Yeah, I also like the idea of maybe consolidating with Seashelt, but my other comment was that so for the short term for Field Road, we're looking at over $1 million of short-term renovations, only to then look 5 years down the road at another $5 million. And in the recent past, construction costs have gone up by about 20% a year. So I'm asking myself, let's just get this over and done with before things get even more expensive. That being said, we already have a lot of costs coming down the pipeline. But in a political context, this is probably not a good thing for me to say, but I like looking at the long term and not at re-election. So I'm going what is best for us in the long term rather than what will get me re-elected. So if we can lay out less money now and then have a long-term gain, I'm for that, rather than trying to make patchwork and then having to redo the reno all over again.
Thank you. Any other comments? Director Beamish?
Just looking at the comparison table on page 5, the Field Road facility site issues and the Mason Road facility site issues. And I'm just, on the last bullet on Field Road, it's a lack of fire suppression in the IT building. Is that something we cannot do? That seems to be something that we should be doing there in any event.
Yeah, in any event, for sure.
Yeah, because it's, whether we do anything else, protecting the equipment and the information in that facility should be something that, even outside the scope of this, we should be looking at doing that fire suppression.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's also, there are smaller projects that could be undertaken in the short term. We didn't necessarily focus on that, where our primary task was really to figure out sort of overall in the next 5 years, but there are short-term tasks that definitely should be looked at, fire suppression being one of them.
Director McMahon, and we'll go back to Director Lee.
Okay, so we are getting ourselves on the path to zero emissions. So I'm wondering what opportunities we have to, we've got a giant roof up there. What opportunities we have to create our own power, and also to daylight the building. I understand that's the term, having spent 10.5 hours in that meeting room next door the other day. Daylight would be a really nice thing. Are there opportunities for doing that are big wins?
Most of that level of detail will flesh out into the detailed planning. The way that we've structured our report, it's all ground floor space in the future, and so you will still have a large amount of roof space that you could do something with, but I wouldn't want to make any comments on that. Just that'll be really for the architectural and engineering assessment.
Director Lee?
This might be just an observation, but I'd be interested in your thoughts too. I wrote down that I was wondering who the stakeholders were you consulted with, and I guess that was because this is all a surprise to me as a director. And I think we as directors are big stakeholders in this business because we represent our residents, each one of us in our area. And so we need to understand the plan. And rural areas particularly, because we're so far from Field Road. And that brings up the second part of my thought process here. And that is that when I talked about work from home, I actually missed the most important part of it, and it is start from home, start work from home. Start work from home saves office space, but it also saves traveling time, and it's also much more friendly to the environment because you're there, and it cuts down travel time. But then that all brought me back to the fact that we haven't done a long-term staffing plan and a long-term business evolution plan. And I guess we either go with what we see here and assume, or we do something along that lines to provide more input to you. I guess that's up to the board to decide which way we go on that. But when we're talking this kind of money, I believe it's very important that we have a very firm plan that takes us not only 5 years, but 20 years. So I guess I'm saying we have some work as well.
Just from our perspective, a comment on that. Yes, I think from our perspective, we would have been very beneficial if there was that sort of long-term strategic plan that's been developed. There was a lot of questions around how services would change over the next 10, 15 years, and those were major questions that were left on the table. And so to say that you should probably do a strategic plan before any sort of long-term planning initiatives happen, I would say would be very beneficial just from the service delivery aspect. Transit did have a strategic plan, and there was a couple other kind of smaller plans that people had put together, but there wasn't one comprehensive strategy that kind of adopted all of the different services that the district provides. And so you're bang on that one. The second thing that I want to comment on was just the work from home policy. So work from home, everybody gets very excited from the potential of, it'll cut down all of our space needs and that sort of thing. But what we've actually seen over the last couple of years is that the people that have transitioned to a fairly a pretty aggressive work from home policy where they're out of the office, let's say 80% of the time. They're actually shifting towards more 2-3 days a week in the office, and 2 days a week it's flexible time. And so you could work from home for a couple days of the week, but a lot of our clients are actually saying that that didn't really work as well as they thought it had. And so to say that it'll eliminate a huge amount of space may not be true, but it would definitely cut down the space, but maybe not to the same sort of impacts that everyone assumes it might happen.
Follow-up?
Yes, I was quite familiar with that. I was working for TELUS when we implemented it big time.
Yeah.
And it's evolving still. I'm staying in touch with the people. But my concern was it is some space gain, but it changes the space you need.
For sure.
And so that's why we need to know where we are going.
Yeah, that's a good point, because the space that you do require is touchdown space, which doesn't have the implications for permanent positions. And so it's actually the allowance cuts down by another 2.5 square meters per person, which is quite significant over the course of 100 people type thing in an office building.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, two quick things. One is I thought I saw a reference in there somewhere to directors having individual offices, which struck me as ridiculous because we don't need them. But I was more interested in the question of emergency planning as well. The previous iteration of the Seashelt Public Works building was also going to be an emergency services center, and we're right, we've got search and rescue right over there. So is that one of the considerations when we are planning the space in this building, is that it might be an emergency headquarters or refuge?
Field Road was identified as one, and so in our plans we did include an allowance for the emergency program equipment, and so that if you did need to set up a room, this would be the space that would be set up in. On Field Road, there was also a request that they have some emergency planning. I can't remember what we put a...
With Mason Road?
Yeah, Mason Road, sorry. It's rubbing off on me. Yeah, it's contagious.
I think Director McMahon was actually talking about Dusty Road. The District of Seashell Dusty Road
okay.
facility.
Okay.
Yes. Right, but you were wondering if we were putting some in Seashell as well on our Dusty Road site. Yes. Director Lamb.
Just wondering, we're finally getting 4 governments working together, and the District of Seashell is looking for new spaces, new council chambers, new office space. I guess that's a big wish list, but it might be worth having a look to see what the needs of our community is, and where are we going 20 years from now. Just, when I was growing up here, it was Roberts, there was always a competition between Roberts Creek and Seashell and Gibson's and that, and hopefully we're getting past that, where we see ourselves as one community and maybe look at how we change our government here.
Director Pratt.
And I'd like to continue on that thread. There's, because with looking at expanding our public works yard and with what the District of Seashell is doing, and then on the southern coast, there's the school district public works yard as well as the town of Gibson's public works yard. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for sharing of space, which would make the space usage a lot more efficient. There's a lot of this was really good to get an overview, because you do worry about the health, safety, and comfort of staff in their working environment. I am concerned about the proposed closure of Lagoon, what that means to that community, because they are very Pender Harbor and Egmont are set quite far away from the rest of the coast, and just that outreach there at all is important, even though we may not be using it for a lot, but we still do have a lot of services up in that area.
Any other comments? Director Hills.
I'm going to come to the conceptual. You got the mini projects, which are kind of the health and safety. And so how do you kind of stick all that stuff together, the mini projects to the conceptual plan to the strategic plan? How do you, as you guys, how do you think of that stuff?
So we generally start off with a better understanding of what the strategic direction is of the organization. And so for that to happen, each of the different departments need a direction to go. And so that's generally a 20-year plan. With a clear understanding of where they want to go, then we kind of work backwards. And so the first thing to do is come up with sort of the long-term strategy. And so in this case, the Field Road long-term strategy would be to blow out the walls and turn this into an open office workplace, which is the most efficient use of space. From there, we work backwards to say, okay, if we're going to do that, well, the short-term option is a little bit different in this case, just because we're really trying to minimize the amount of disruption and renovations. But we definitely work from the long-term goals and then work back. So that's our strategy. But to get a really good understanding and to have meaningful outcomes, you have to have a very clear vision to where the organization wants to go.
And the follow-up is when the vision is less clear,
yeah.
What do we do?
We make assumptions. So, and that's where the staff interviews and the leadership interviews really do come into play, because there's a lot of information available just in-house without necessarily having a strategic plan put together that we capture. And then from those, where I showed all the different planning factors with an arrow, green arrow or red arrow, those are all the different considerations that we tried to put into play in our decision for what's going to happen in the future. And so at some level, there's definitely assumptions being made, but at least they're the most appropriate assumptions that we know of today.
Director McMahon?
Yes, I just, was this building built with the possibility of going up?
It was noted in a few different conversations that could have been the case. We have not had an engineer review the drawings to say if it was or not. Yeah.
Director Lee.
Yes, thank you, Chair Pratt, for the Lagoon Road comments. I was saving it the best for last.
Oh, so sorry.
But that's part of my earlier comments, of course. There is the distance to consider here in the Sunshine Coast. And the keeping employees occasionally help if they're where they work, if they live where they work. And the distances are pretty great here, especially if you start from Egmont. And also there is the, there's no other way to describe it, the political part of the puzzle. And political in that everybody is taxpayers. And boy, do they keep an eye on our dollars for us. And if they believe that we are wasting time with long commutes to mow a lawn, I get to hear about it every week in the summer. I don't know if it was a deliberate look at it and we understand the economics and we can explain it. It's a good thing to be able to do that. And with the Lagoon Road, it provides 3 days of employment for local people. And it's important to the community to have that there, very important to the community. Therefore, it becomes quite important to me. So we have to look at those kind of things when we're making these plans. So that's my comments.
Maybe just quickly comment on that. So from our perspective, we understand that there is a whole other political lens that generally is applied to any sort of plan that we put forward. We try to keep the political out of our decision making, and then it's up to the board or council to apply that lens. The other comment about potentially, the distances are great on the coast. We understand that. And from a functional standpoint, it was hard for us to say that was a requirement, just because of how infrequently that the material and everything was actually accessed from that location. So I understand that there probably are benefits to keeping it, but from a functional standpoint, consolidation made more sense. It speaks to the same sort of idea of the consolidated warehouse or the consolidated laydown, same sort of idea. So it can be more efficient.
So I've got Director Ties, and then Hiltz, and then McMahon.
All right. two things. One of the things was that when I looked over these plans, I saw a lot of potential for future facilities to look at sustainability, including rainwater collection for bus washing. I'm not sure if that's happening already. Electric charging stations, and looking ahead at the possible implementation of hydrogen as a fuel for our transit vehicles with fuel cells. They're sort of on the cusp at this point, but that's certainly something that we need to look towards in the further future. Apparently by 2030, those will be market ready, and then solar panels or solar roof tiling should certainly be considered. The other thing that I noted was that there's a lot of stuff that's just lying around, especially in Mason Road, but I think there's also several sites that have stuff lying around that's no longer useful, and I'm wondering if the staff needs any kind of action from the board to expedite the removal of that stuff, because really there's no reason for it to be there.
I'll turn that last one over to staff. I think where the board, Director Ties is going with this is there additional resourcing that the board needs to put forward to assist staff in making something happen?
Thank you for the question, Chair. I'll leave the additional resourcing question to our CFO. But in terms of process, this is a time of year when there appears to be a lot of material. Staff are just going into a regular asset disposition process, and so right now there is a live bid opportunity that relates to the disposal of many of the surplus or other adjective that might be used material that has accumulated at particularly the Mason Road site over about a year, and the committee can expect to see that material moves out shortly. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Sure, thanks. I guess for me, it's the asset management plan seems to be the backbone of how the board and the organization understands. So I'm wondering how your work and the staff's asset management tie together, and are there gaps? Where are we in the asset management of the facilities, I suppose, is the question.
I don't know who would answer that one.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I think that one of the things that Cornerstone highlights is that we have just a limited amount of services that have strategic and or service plans, as we call them, so long-range plans. So the asset management planning work is one of the pieces that would inform a long-range service plan, because your asset management plan is really how we're going to take these assets to provide the service. So in terms of where we are corporately for asset management plans, is we've done a very high-level asset management plan, and now we're drilling down right to the details of operational and capital needs and long-range planning. So I think we're still in the infancy of the detailed work, so more to come.
Director Mann?
Well, it seems to me an obvious next step here is to consult the District of Sechelt, the Town of Gibsons, the school district, probably the SIGD as well, to see where all of us stand with our space needs, particularly in regards to works yards and so forth, and where there is some opportunities to combine services or sites, because I can tell you that would make it a lot more politically digestible. If we are visibly seen to be collaborating coast-wide, this is something that taxpayers ask for all the time. So to me, that would be an obvious next step. And the other obvious one, which probably is already in place, is to identify a few short-term wins, like the fire suppression, that we can just move on right now, and they need to be done.
Okay. Did you catch the first part of that? I have that we consult other governments on the Sunshine Coast regarding space needs and where there may be opportunity to combine services and/or sites. And you'd like to make that? And I think the other piece we can put, I've got some other pieces here as well. Moved. Is there a seconder for that one? Seconded. Any other comments, questions on that one? All those in favor? Thank you. Anything else that people want to bring up? I've been writing some things down as we've been going to kind of pull those pieces together. Director Tice.
Well, I did somewhat hear a request for a corporate strategic plan, and I'm wondering if that might be something that our new CAO might tackle in the when he or she comes aboard. And as to whether that needs a motion right now, I'm not sure, but it certainly seems to be something that should be on our radar.
Okay, so I have a number of things that have kind of been bantered back and forth here. One is a long-term plan for staffing. So it's a strategic plan for staffing going forward. At least a 20-year plan is what we're looking at, because that will help inform the space that's required. I think we're looking for short-term requirements right now. What is necessary to be done right now, and what are the long-term requirements based on that staffing that comes forward. And inside of that, I think an important piece will be timing. If we wait for the long-term plan, the five, the bigger thing, what's the timing and what's the impact on staff to get to that? Can we actually hold out on some of these changes? I understand the situation is pretty critical right now. There are needs now, and we may not be able to, although we may like to, we may need to do some of the shorter pieces now to buy some time to get to that long-term piece. And I think we could probably work with both of them. So it looks like we need staff to take these reports, go away, do some more work with them, and then come back and answer those kinds of questions for us and give us some kind of direction going forward. Did I capture kind of what we're looking at? Okay. And does that make sense in a motion?
Make it happen.
Do you want me to repeat some of what I've said? Or do you want to take a stab at it?
Thank you, Chair. I'm guessing we're looking for a staff report in terms of long-term planning for staffing for a 20-year plan, short-term requirements, necessary items versus long-term requirements based on staffing coming forward, and the timing for the short-term items in relation to the long-term plans coming forward.
Good job. Okay.
So much smarter than me.
That captures what we're talking about and what staff are potentially looking at?
Yes, Chair, that definitely does. Thank you.
Someone like to make that motion? Yep. Moved and seconded. And comments? Any comments, questions? Director Hills.
Yeah, in the motion, it's the mini projects, I think, as the consultants have called them, these mini projects. We're looking for kind of a list of mini projects for these immediate concerns. And one with the HVAC is, as we, in this room particularly, there's the cold shoulder and the hot head, and the heating in this building seems to be one of the, I hear it from people and I feel it myself. So is that captured? So these mini projects, I think, is kind of what the immediate issues.
Yes and no. Okay. If we look at this and say, okay, we need to fix the fire suppression in the IT department, but we don't have enough space in this building for the staff who are actually working here. We've got somebody perched in a corner somewhere. Then those short-term, immediate kinds of safety kinds of things aren't sufficient. So I think we're looking to staff to actually make the distinction. Can we just do those? Do we need to do more of that 1 million kind of piece? Or do we have to go for the full build? And can we hold off on the short-term 1 million piece before moving forward with the 5, depending on timing? I mean, we know it's not going to be a year. right? If we look at a long-term plan, we're looking at a few years down the road. What needs to happen in that time frame, and what kind of phasing has to happen in order to actually make this building viable for the staff we have now while we're getting to that long-term piece. So all of that is part of the big plan that has to be put together. Come back and advise us. Okay? Great. Director Lee?
I think you hit it right on the nose. And in fact, if we have to rent temporary space for a department while we get ready, it's always best to look before you leap so that the landing is okay.
Director McMahon, you had a comment?
I'm just going to say that it may entirely be a coincidence that we spent 10 and a half hours in that meeting room just before we got the space report. But we don't typically spend time at Mason Road. And I think sometimes the facilities staff get ignored in these kind of planning things. So I think it's really important to make sure that all of our work sites are adequate. Not just this one that we see all the time. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Director Beamish.
No, Jerry, I just want to acknowledge that I found the report very useful, very informative, and I appreciate the complex issue that you've had to go through here. And it's not finished yet, but it certainly helps us to focus on a number of areas that we need to focus on in years to come. And thank you for the report.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you. No, we're going to do that next. Okay. So we haven't received the presentation or the report, so I'd like a motion to receive both of those now. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. All right. You're smiling over there. All right. Let's. I'd like to make a motion to receive all the reports. Moved, seconded. All in favor? Thank you. So we're going to move on to Annex B, 2020-2024 Financial Plan Outlook. And, sorry, there's a presentation for this one? Yes. Okay. Okay, no, go ahead. This is a presentation. It's a presentation from Tina. Yep.
Thank you for the opportunity to present the budget here. As stated previously, the actual schedule for the budget has been moved up a little bit in an efforts to have the budget adopted earlier in the year of 2020 to enable the board and staff to proceed with programs and tendering, et cetera, earlier in the new year. Also, with the direction by the board on September 12th meeting that the draft strategic plan was to be utilized in putting forward the budget proposals was most helpful to staff, and we appreciate and thank you for that. The direction was to the staff putting forward the budgets to put a keen eye to the strategic plan. There is a section that's devoted to that, to identify the projects which not only support the strategic plan but promote initiatives that help in achieving the goals of the board. Secondly, the plan itself is very aggressive in terms of timing and amount of projects. Certainly, in talking with the CFO, a greater number than in most years. But with the asset management planning coming forward, the need to look at significant projects like the water and the landfill, for example, I promoted the concept to staff to be forthright in their requests and be looking at the longer term, which, as mentioned by the board, was the desire to look at where we actually are in terms of our assets and our infrastructure and our needs. So that's what's being brought forward this morning.
Thank you. So we just wanted to go a little bit over the process that staff have undergone, a little bit about what we're going to be covering for pre-budget today. And as the CAO said, we typically have one meeting for pre-budget, sometimes two, which include our stakeholders, but now that's going to be synthesized into round one. So again, from the financial planning process, having the strategic plan was very helpful for staff. So we focused on the 5 strategic focus areas in developing the budget, the proposed initiatives that are in front of you today. Because the strategic plan was just recently adopted on October the 12th, staff did still consider those as some of the initiatives, but we didn't have the time to do a separate process for strategic plan implementation. So there are items within the proposed initiatives that are for strategic plan implementation to achieve the tactics within the timelines outlined in the plan. So the purpose of today's pre-budget meeting is to really just provide a snapshot to the board of what some initiatives are out there. It's not exhaustive. So again, really what staff are seeking is to provide, to seek direction from the board on goals and objectives for the budget process. This may include some taxation thresholds and essentially just any other direction they can provide in the next step of the process, which is actually providing the detailed budget proposals. So, of course, what's already been mentioned today is we don't have detailed service plans, but that's one of the steps that's going to be coming forward in the round one is for staff to provide service plan lights. So the board can see in a snapshot what people are doing currently within the existing services, what's the existing staffing complement, those types of things. So you can see when you see this proposed initiatives, those are outside of what staff have to do from a day-to-day perspective. So how much capacity does staff have, as an example, to do 5 more projects? So for carry-forwards, the reason why the board sees carry-forwards is we need to formally take those projects that are currently underway or not completed yet to affirm that the board wants to continue on and include them in the financial plan going forward, give the staff authority to continue spending on those particular initiatives, and provide a big picture to the board as to how many projects are still on the docket for the next year, from a resourcing perspective as well. So the proposed initiatives do include the board's new strategic plan. They're based on priorities and the rating that we determined as part of pre-budget. And what the ask is for today is really to confirm those projects that the board doesn't want to see, because we have, if we go one by one on the ones they want to see, we'd probably be here for a few days. So it's not to get into the details of what those initiatives are. It's really just to get a sense as to give you an idea of some initiatives that are out there and that need doing, and some of the resourcing in order for us to achieve some of those things, and to get direction from the board on what they'd like to see further in round one. So just to give you an idea of what you can anticipate seeing in December, once those proposed initiatives come forward, is we've tried to align the new budget proposal templates to align with the board's strategic goals. And again, if there are areas here that the board wants to see in addition, staff can include those. There's also a step that was added in our internal process this year, where there was more of a project management approach to doing proposed initiatives. So staff did project initiation briefs, as we do, so a little more business casing coming forward, and so you can anticipate seeing more detail when those proposed initiatives come. So again, just our rating structure has been modified a little bit this year than in past years. Mandatory projects in the past, things like eminent asset failure, regulatory and safety, were just uploaded in the round one budget numbers. This time you're going to see budget proposals. That was one of the takeaways out of this board's budget debrief. So you'll see more proposals than typically. Business continuity, again, are things like, cost of doing business are increasing, and contract costs, etc. So those are what those initiatives are about. And then board strategic and corporate plans. So corporate plans is included because there might be things like the Transit Future Plan that may or may not be directly linked into a strategic plan tactic or target, but yet it's a corporate plan that we have commitment to continue on with. And then low cost, high value, so quick wins and other things that really just don't fit with any corporate plan or strategic initiative. So again, you have various formats. This is not meant to be, but it's really just to depict how the rating criteria has been done. It's been sorted in various ways, either through departments or through priority, or through carry forwards, etc. So you have it in multiple ways, so hopefully that's been helpful. But again, if there are other ways or summaries that the board wants to see, the bottom right-hand corner there shows a summary of what the proposed funding are for all of these projects, and each category is subtotaled. But again, we pointed out that there are a lot of to be determines in the proposed initiatives. So there are things that are still being fleshed out. For example, November infrastructure, you're going to be receiving the water reservoir next steps, and so that information will be forthcoming. So we're still evolving. So one of the things we also highlighted in the staff report, and again, the caveat is this is not exhaustive, but there are some considerations to factor in as the board is making some of these budget decisions. And so this is the last year of the collective agreement as an example, and so we have to consider what future implications any negotiated rates are in the future. Those have been factored in just for preliminary taxation numbers based on sort of what the market is experiencing at the moment. So at least we don't have zero in there. We have something that is more realistic. There's also exempt wage increases, but I also wanted to note that we have a resolution to review the director remuneration as well. So we have new staff positions that were approved in 2019, and as you may recall, we usually prorate those particular staff positions, but so the full costing impact will be in the 2020 budget. We also have the employer health tax full implementation in 2020 and the removal of the MSP premiums. So we're going to see a slight reduction in our benefits costs. We don't know exactly how much yet or how material, but it will be a decrease overall. We have another year of the IT capital funding increases, which is supported through support service funding. So it's about 70-30 split from taxation. We have operational contracts that have increased, and we have ports funding and the landfill funding closure of $125,000 that's going in there. So those are some of the decisions that have already been made that financially impact next year's budget. Mentioned some of the items that are in progress. So we have curbside organics, we have green waste contracts that are expiring, recycling collection for areas B and D, water projects. We have our utility rates, which in conjunction with the asset management planning, for example, for wastewater facilities, we could expect some changes there. Today we received the corporate space plan and have received some more direction on where to go with those next steps. But again, in the proposed initiatives, there are some considerations, such as parks. And again, the transit annual operating agreement, we're not quite, haven't quite received what the full impacts of those are, and if there's any considerations for transit changes. So preliminary tax by area has been provided in the staff report, and so they are a very high level estimate. They're based on existing service level and contractual obligations. So in some of our contractual obligations, there might be cost escalators, so those have been factored in. They are not representative of any assessment changes, so any apportionment issues or allocations within some of the various service participants. And so we won't receive our BC assessment impacts until round 2, because December, we don't receive those until January the 1st. We do get some of the non-market changes, but those won't be reflected until the round 2. And then we actually don't get the final assessment values until after our budget's adopted, but that's that's consistent with past years. So starting off here, we're at about an overall 3.17%, and again, this is very preliminary, so it shows that we're at about $641,000 worth of new taxation dollars over 2019. So what staff have already also produced is what you consider when you're making some of your decisions. So what does a 1% tax increase for each area mean? This is very difficult in a regional district area because, of course, it really depends on what services you participate in. When it's a regional district or a regional service, or if you're just that one participant, it's quite easy. But if it's a regional or a combination of, it's more difficult. But, you know, it shows you that approximately, you know, $23,000 is a 1% tax increase for Area A. So overall, it's about $200,000. Every $200,000 worth of decision means a 1% overall tax increase for the regional district. Noting, too, that the regional district portion of any taxation is just one piece of the pie. We have school taxes, we have police, rural taxation. In the municipalities, we can be anywhere from 22% to 26% of their overall tax bill. So it's important for residents to understand that. No, it just means that, for instance, it's really just what we requisition for that particular area. So for Area A, they probably $2.3 million is what their overall taxation is out of the $20 million from last year, and so it's just a straight line. So again, just to reiterate some of the financial plan timelines that have been changed, and some of these too have been now communicated to our community partners and stakeholders, so they understand when things are required and the change in process, so hopefully that will help streamline. We also have our special corporate and administrative services meeting on October 31st, and we have forewarned community members to dress up. That's going to be happening next week. So the agenda goes out for that one, and it's just for the libraries meeting. So round 1 will be happening December 4th through 6th, and that's when you'll be receiving the service plan lights, as well as our community partners and stakeholders' budget submissions. So again, some of the public presentations. I flagged it for January and February, but this is an area where I think needs further exploration. We have a lot of public engagement related to projects, so a lot of project or public outreach for water projects. There might be some planning initiatives, etc. So there might be some opportunities here to give staff some feedback on what else or what more we could do in order to engage community members on the budget process. So we have round 2 scheduled for February 10th and 11th, and the financial plan bylaw adoption for February 27th, which is a month earlier than we have in the past. So any questions on the process before we get going?
I guess it's a question on understanding of the 1%. It surprised me that 1% for Area A would be, let's say, 23,000, and for Area B is 34,000, when we have very similar characteristics. So there's something I don't quite understand there.
IPPs, independent power projects in Area B, do attract quite a considerable amount of taxation from an assessment perspective for Area B, and so their mix of compared to Area A for residential, I think Area A it's 90-something% residential mix so Area B has that change. So in the assessment value, I think it's in the neighborhood of almost 100 or like it's several $100 million of utilities class assessment in Area B. So
Follow up.
So Area B is collecting more tax overall, and so 1% is more?
Correct.
Director Beamish?
Is it possible to display that graph again that showed the kind of projected increases based upon what we know now? It was just one table. It's in the, okay. Yeah. I just wanted to see it. The one before that. That one there, yeah, I just wanted to see. So if we do nothing, that's where we look at, that's where we're standing as a projection right now.
And this is on page, in your package, it's actually on page 181 as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
Same table.
So that, it's just an interesting graph to see comparatively everybody up there, like Area A and Town of Gibson's are roughly similar in that particular graph. And I'd like to keep it that way, by the way. So can I make a motion?
Good luck. We're going to be getting into a list.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Director Lee?
I heard that there was more project planning discipline. Are we considering a gating structure, including a PIR in that process?
Do you want to speak in English? Okay, you can explain it then.
So I think the crux of the matter is that we are trying to provide more project management rigor to our processes internally, and it really depends on the scope of the project. So in the case of our water projects, that most certainly is being applied universally, either through our consultants, and we're also trying to do internally, because in the past some of those things weren't always done, and so there was a lot of unknowns that would arise. So what we're trying to do is eliminate those unknowns. So yes, we have what's called a project management community of practice within the organization internally. So there's a lot of staff training, templates, tools, training development for staff that's occurring. So the answer is yes.
And what does PIR mean?
Typically, gating means that certain parts of the project get executive approval before they proceed. So, for instance, a business case, executive approval before you go design, executive approval before you build. And one of the last things that I find is I have found which is very important, is a thing called PIR, which is post-implementation review. Did you meet your objectives? Did you learn from it so you don't do it again if there is a problem? So PIRs are actually very often overlooked and probably one of the more valuable things you can do.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks. Thanks for the presentation. And the thing that echoes in my mind is last year, roughly about this time, you kept saying it'll make more sense next year. So I'm trying to expand on that, making more sense. So the chart about, as Director Beamer said, the do-nothing chart, if you could just kind of summarize the do-nothing aspect of those preliminary estimates of the changes in the budget, and just make it more understandable.
I'm going to jump in here.
What's in it?
I'm going to jump in here before we go to staff, because that's part of what we're going to be going through in our spreadsheets. Okay, to come up with those mandatory items that are already included in these numbers. We're going to go through those line by line very shortly. Okay. Yeah. And staff?
There's no mandatory items in there, but it's
the carry forwards and it's
the list of items. So the collective agreement, the contract increases, those ports projects that you'd already included, things that the board has already approved are what's already included in those numbers. So things that you've already said yes to, or that we have contractual obligations to continue.
So that's on page 180. Okay. Director Lee, what we're going to do is just some preliminary questions here, then we're going to take a break, because then we're going to get down into all these line items. Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
It is related to process too, rather than individual projects. I was wondering if there's a way we could have, I'll call it a straw man finished product percent increase as we go. For instance, it's saying 1% right now. Well, is there any way you could use a magic ball and give us some sort of a feel for, if we approve the total package as we have, what the percent increase would be with our various districts? Or is that? Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of items that don't have numbers yet. And part of the process today is to identify for staff which items we want to take out so that we can actually get to that number.
So I guess my question is,
not now.
Is there some point where we can get that?
Yes. Staff?
Yes. During round one, if you recall last year, we would input as you made those decisions. But I think what you're wanting to do is, before you make the decision, understand what the impact's going to be. I think at this point, there are some projects that we could do that with, but like you said, there's a lot of to be determined. And there's also some policy decisions, I'm going to say, which I didn't really highlight in my overview yet, but I did mention in the agenda review. Water, for instance, a lot of these projects are being funded from reserves, and if you do all of those within those funding envelopes, you're going to pretty much fully deplete the reserves in the water. So there might be a bigger discussion about water project funding sources that might need to happen in this process between now and when the budget gets adopted. Those are user rates, and I understand that, but I'm highlighting those because, to me, we talk a lot about the ad valorem taxation, that bottom line taxation number there. But you're going to make a lot of decisions that are really going to impact user rates this year, and I think we have to take that into context in the case of curbside recycling as an example. The impact there for food waste is over $100, I think it's $60 per person? Yeah. $60 per person. So from a tax dollar perspective, that's a few percent.
Okay, good. Okay. So before we get into the rest of this, we've been sitting here for a couple of hours. I think we're going to take a 5-minute break, washroom break, et cetera, and then we'll come back and we'll dive in detail. Thanks. All right, let's do the dive. First thing I want to do is point you into your agenda package and look at 181, page 181. So this reiterates the other potential budget impacts at the bottom of the page that are not yet included. So I just want you to have those in the back of your mind before we go forward, because these will also be implications, financial implications going forward. So curbside organics and organics drop-off locations, green waste processing, and South Coast drop-off site. Page 182 starts at the top, the water supply expansion projects, utility rate reviews, taking into account the water, wastewater, and curbside collection, and the bylaw amendments, the transit annual operating agreement, corporate space plan, water, wastewater facilities asset management plan, and then remuneration, both the collective agreement, the board, and exempt staff, and strategic plan implementation. So those, some of those items, there are some of them referred to in the documents we're going to be looking at shortly, but some of them, most of them do not have numbers attached to them at this point. Okay, so let's look at, we want to look at our spreadsheets, these big spreadsheets that we've got in front of us. So we're going to start with the ones in pink. These are the carry forwards. So let's go page by page. Any questions on page 1? Okay, okay. I have to do the same thing. Sorry, Director McMahon and then Director Beamish.
I know this is tough, but I have a sort of a general question. Most of these are obvious things like fire safety, rescue equipment, or whatever, and a number of them are already underway. But I'm just wondering if there's any ones here that could or should be deferred, given, you know, all of the other stuff we have going on. Just general question.
And staff?
Yeah, I think that if you look at your agenda on page 191, there's actually only one project that staff are recommending to remove from the financial plan and not carry it forward into the 2020 financial plan, and that and the GM can answer to it, but it's for the Sunshine Coast Arena Water Efficiency Project, because there's emerging issues there, and so there's different water efficiency that's been gained, and sort of some different initiatives that are being explored. So staff are essentially recommending everything there should be included in the financial plan, and hence the recommendation on page 191. But if there's any questions, we can answer them.
Director Beamish? Did you want to address that now? I mean, it is in the recommendation that one come out. Did you want to have staff refer to the others? Or this one, or?
Well, actually, since it was mentioned, it does make sense to go to that, and the recommendation is perfectly sensible.
Right.
Would it be out of order to move that recommendation, or is that confusing the issue here?
Not necessarily. We could do that. Director Hall, do you want to? GM Hall, please address that.
Thank you, Chair. In addition to the comments that are noted in the covering staff report on page 192, which outline why staff are not recommending moving forward with a study, basically given that work is already done, I did bring some post-implementation review notes for this project. So just to give the committee an example of the water savings that have been realized as a result of work that was undertaken actually in preparation for the project, which we are now recommending not to proceed with. Using first quarter water consumption figures for Sunshine Coast Arena, which is a good comparable because it's typically when the ice plant is operating for the whole quarter. The 2016 daily cubic meters of water used, 31.6. And then through some measures that were done with the old equipment, we were able to drop that to around 21 cubic meters per day. And in 2019, that's been cut to 9.7. Yeah. So that's
amazing.
Yeah. So based on the success of that project and previous work that staff have undertaken with fixtures inside the building, it's now operating at a water efficiency level that's on par or even ahead of the industry. And so further study isn't recommended at this time.
Good answer.
That's a great start.
Okay, Director Beamish.
In terms of the table we're looking at on the pigs, these are projects that were approved last year or even previous to that and are either not started or incomplete. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So can we assume that the taxation for these projects has already been done so that these projects, the continuation of these projects, if they stay on the books at this level, does not add to taxation?
Staff?
Yes, that's correct. Carry forward projects do not impact any of the financial implications. The only time that they do is if you come back and what you expected it to cost needs to cost more and you need to requisition more.
So if we take a project off this list, it's something that we've taxed the public for, and we're simply going to reallocate those funds to something else. Is that correct?
In some cases, it's not funded through taxation.
Okay.
A lot of these projects were funded through reserves.
Okay.
So it depends what project it is.
Right.
So that if it was tax funded, then we would have to have a conversation about how we repatriate those funds.
Yeah. I mean, in the overall context of a work plan, this is already a significant work plan for the year, just to carry through these projects, let alone add anything more to it. And this would, these projects don't increase the overall taxation or impact our overall taxation. So we go beyond this in new projects we're adding. So I just wanted to understand that. Thank you.
Staff?
The budget project status report that was presented at the last Corporate and Administrative Services meeting gave you a snapshot of where the status of those projects are. There were several that were completed, so that some that fell off. There are some here that a lot of staff do anticipate, and the two GMs can maybe speak to that too, that are anticipated to fall off. There might be some odds and sods, so there might be another 20 projects that fall off. It might be too aggressive, but there's 68 projects here.
The other piece to consider inside of the funding the funding as different here at the regional district than it is in our municipalities is if we take one of these projects off, it's been taxed for that project. It cannot necessarily be used in another area. Right. Yes. Director McMahon.
I was just enjoying on page 199 or 6, depending on which one you're looking at, that it's Lover Road, Ocean Beach Esplanade.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, are we renaming it? It would be popular.
I like it. I love the road.
Okay, let's get through this. So anything on page 1 that anyone wants to question? Did you have a general question, or you want another page? Okay, general question. Go ahead. Could you use your microphone, please?
It's a kind of follow-up with Bill's question, and that is I kind of like total committed to date, so it kind of tells me where we are in the project. Are we almost finished? Is it just starting? That kind of thing. It doesn't matter for this purpose, but that's just a general comment maybe in the future. Because what I was doing, I found myself going back and forth between two spreadsheets to find the total committed so I could put the project in context in my mind.
Okay, the committed is carry forward. So the approved budget. So look at number 110. Approved budget is 25,000. Carry forward is 25,000.
Whoops, where are you?
This one. First page. First page. First one. 25,000 is the approved budget amount. 25,000 is what's being carried forward.
Yeah, but
So look down. Look at the fourth line down. 190,183, right, is the budget amount. 93,598 is what's carried forward. So
is
spent
the one,
about
is the
100,000.
190 the total we've spent so far?
No, that's the budget amount. That's the
For-
project amount.
For 2019?
That was what was budgeted for it.
For 2019 or
Yes.
total?
2019 for that project.
Yeah, so did we spend $1 million before this?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
That was my question.
Okay. So I think what he's looking at, are there carry forwards from previous years that is not reflected in here? Or is this budget amount the initial amount that was budgeted for this and not just for 2019? Yes, what?
Yes. So say a project was first approved in 2018 for $1 million. That still remains here. So it's the original project. No, it's not? No. Oh, we might have changed that.
Okay, would you like to clarify?
Thank you, Chair. When I do the analysis of these, I look at the carry forwards budgets that were being brought forward, and most of them are updated from that original, what was left over from the original project, say in 2015. So that would be what's left over. So if there was $1 million spent, it wouldn't necessarily show that it was already done. It would have been what was carried forward from the year before, and then what's been used this year.
So your question is, do we have projects that are multi-year that are reflected on this spreadsheet? And that this only shows the 2019 amount that was budgeted carried forward?
Yes, because when I went to, there was another sheet provided that did talk about the whole budget, so I could go back and forth and find the total. So, for instance, if we have spent $750,000 and we're only going to spend $25,000 more, it's no use me looking at that. You're not going to talk about a sunk cost of that amount without finishing the project. But if we just started and spent $1,000 last year, maybe to heck with it. We'll do something else. That's my thought process.
Okay. And I don't know, can staff identify those items in here? You're looking at the multi-year projects. Which ones are the multi-year projects that are still on this spreadsheet?
Further comment?
Yeah.
I'd satisfied myself by going back and forth. It just would have been easier if it was in one page. So
Okay.
I don't see any I am
So
concerned
you don't have
about.
any questions? Okay. Staff?
It's the budget project status report that has the original project, and if it hasn't started, it'll say there. And if things are in progress or what percentage they are, it's that report. We could always provide that if you like.
Okay. I think he's done that already.
Okay.
So he's okay.
I just thought there was something to comment.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So any questions on page 1 on the projects?
Should we skip through the whole page?
I don't, does anybody have any questions about any of them in the carry forwards? Director Lee.
The pages on the computer are different than the pages on the sheet, so I'll talk about 504 instead, if that's okay. And it is strictly a curiosity question.
Sorry, which one is it? 504?
504
Page
just
5
was.
in the paper version.
Okay.
Rural
planning.
zoning
Yep.
bylaw 310.
Thank you.
I was curious how this worked. Two questions. Is this isn't just capital? Is it capital and expense? The figures?
Staff?
If you're looking at the rural planning zoning bylaw, that would be just operations. That's operational dollars. So
Expense dollars.
yes.
Okay. That then answered my second part of the question, is why is A in there? Thank you.
Okay, any other items for the carry forwards? Director McMahon.
Oh, I'll just ask about Hillside Development Project. It's my recollection that we've now leased all the land in Hillside? Is that correct? Or refresh my memory why we are wanting to attract people.
GM.
Thank you for the question, Chair. At Hillside, all easily marketable land has been leased or sold. So what remains are large, unserviced parcels that bring with them questions about the types of development that might be attractable and what the greatest community benefit of the lands owned by the regional district there would be. Since I have the opportunity to mention it, I'll also note that the water head lease from the province for Hillside expires in a handful of years. And so this project relates to global level planning for the future of that site, as well as the specific question about potential subdivision and marketing of lands at Hillside.
I'm going to follow up on that piece. Is this something then that we're anticipating is in-house, or is this something that part of it we could probably subcontract maybe out to Scredo?
Thank you for the question. When this project was proposed initially, it was described as being supported with external resources and the possibility of supporting or matching grants to contribute as well. The service plans that will come forward at round one budget will include an indication of the base level operating resources for each service. And for Hillside, off the top of my head, I believe there's far less than one FTE dedicated to this. And so this project would require some external resources unless a radical reallocation was done internally.
CEO?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to comment further. This is one of the projects, among others, that we discussed at our CAO meeting that perhaps could be looked at through Scredo. So, again, collaboration on any of these items, we'd look to our neighboring municipalities and the Scredo organization and our agreement with them.
Thank you. Any other questions on any of the carry forward items? So let's see if there's anything on this side of the table. Okay, Director Lee?
The Area A OCP had a leftover action item of forming a task force to consider tidal water zoning, and also it had a leftover project of updating the bylaw 337 to reflect the recent decisions made in the Area A OCP, which we have approved. I don't see any project on that, and it should be I believe it should be a carryover project that we need to get done this year. So should we put one here?
And staff?
Thank you for the question, Director, and staff take note of that, and we'll look at whether that can be accomplished within the base operating budget or whether a proposal should be brought forward.
Any other questions on any of the carry forwards? All right. Cool. Move on to the next category. So the next one will be the mandatory. So this will be the sheet that has the blue at the top. It's a one page. These are the mandatory items, and they're categorized mandatory. Imminent asset failure is the first category. So it's half a page. Any questions about any of those? So it'll be 212, 216, 370, et cetera is where it starts.
How far are we going into the mandatories? I've got a question on, I think, on page. You're going on
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items.
okay.
Imminent asset failure.
First block. Okay.
First block.
Okay.
Imminent asset failure. I'm not seeing any questions on that, so let's look at next category, regulatory compliance. That's the rest of that page, and on the flip side, half a page. Director Hills.
On the flip side, 370, the Chapman Flow environmental needs. I'm just wondering about the classifications, and is this like a board initiative, or is this a mandatory? It seems to be tied to a board initiative to reduce the consumption. So I'm just wondering about the classifications of mandatory compliance versus board initiative.
And staff.
Thank you for the question. I think the assessment made by the director is correct. It is related to be in compliance, but we are currently in compliance, and this is more to request a change in the requirements itself.
So is it classified correctly, or should it be in another block? That's kind of, what's the significance of the block, I guess? Should it be in the board initiatives block?
Currently, we will look at this further. We'll have an internal discussion because it could also be somewhere else. Thank you.
And at this point, I think what they want to, either way it's categorized, do we want to move forward with it? Right? I vote yes. No. Any other questions on the regulatory compliance pieces? Okay, the last category is safety requirement.
Safety third, as it were.
Director Lee?
Our fire department in Pender has identified that they would like to see a generator in the Garden Bay pump station for fire safety. Fires could very easily cut the power line off and stop access to our area. We have one way, and they're both together. So they would like to see a generator reinstalled in the Garden Bay pump station. It was there, and it was taken out, and we're not sure why. So I'd like to see a project to put the generator back in this year.
And you'd classify that as a safety requirement?
Yes.
Staff, comments?
Thank you very much for the question. The generator that was there when the SRD took over the assets ultimately reached the end of its life, useful life, and was decommissioned. Replacing it would cost $70,000 to $100,000. Currently, only very few of our water source pump stations have a fixed generator on site. It's only the two major treatment plants that have so. For the remaining ones, we have mobile generators available on trailers that we can pull to either location where needed. So that's the current process. In discussion with staff, other staff, we discussed that as part of our review of the proposed review of the North Pender water system. There's a project proposal for that included here as well. We can review what actually the needs are for that system, and if there would be a need to have an identified a fixed generator there on site. And as part of the process, we can also discuss and maybe explore opportunities to have a mobile generator in the Pender area that could be moved around amongst different agencies. Thank you.
The different agencies, would that be like the Egmont Water, South Pender, and North Pender? That
could be other fire department, BC Ferries. Let's take a more holistic look. In case there would be an emergency that would require a large generator, what is the best way to source it, given that there are significant financial resources associated with it? And the reserves currently available at the North Pender system are okay, but not there's not a large reserve fund currently available at the North Pender system. Thank you.
So it sounds like you'd like to see a budget item come forward for consideration
Yes.
in round one for a mobile generator for the Pender area.
I'd like a staff recommendation before we do that to see what's the best solution. I thought there was already one in the South Pender, so my knowledge might be short here.
Okay, just to follow up, do we have time to have a staff report come forward before we actually get into budget on this item?
I think we can at least we can try to get one for round two, and otherwise it will be round one. Otherwise it will be round two. But yes, we'll as part of this project process, we'll make sure that there is a staff report with a recommendation on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Tice.
My knowledge of the North Pender water system is somewhat limited. Would emergency fire flow still be available if that pump was not operational? Or is it a gravity-fed system, or is it not? Because I think that would be a big consideration, whether you need a generator there or not.
The reservoir has decent sized capacity, and that is more than enough for us to bring the generator from here to there if needed at the moment. It would only be if there is a large earthquake or whatever, and the road is impacted, that we would not be able to get the generator up there.
Director Lee?
It's at a Garden Bay Lake. Everything's pumped up. Have to fill the tanks, yes. And if there was an earthquake and a resulting fire, those tanks would not last very long.
Long enough for the generator to get there.
If the road was passable.
Yeah.
But we've got 50 kilometers of the worst road on the coast here. So the chances of that road being passable after an earthquake and or a fire are not good.
Okay. Any other of these mandatory items that anybody would like to address? Director Beamish.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this applies, but any of the costs associated with the review or the legal around the foundation agreement, should they be reflected here at this time, or they have been discussed?
Staff.
Thank you. This report was prepared. The recommendation adopted at ISC last week has not been adopted yet by the board. Once done this afternoon, that will be part of the carry forward project. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on mandatory? All right, let's move on to the long wish list. So here we're going to go page by page. Start with number 113 at the top.
Page by paper page?
Yes, page by paper page. I'm just going to find my other page in here so I can see the ones I have. So this is business continuity mandatory. Now, these are not mandatory to go forward. It may be that a project has started taking it to the next step. If we don't go to the next step, the project dies. For example, first one is asset management program. So looking at $10,000 to move this forward to the next step. Okay, Director Hiltz.
I just needed a little bit of clarification on the business continuity and the category. So this isn't about, is business continuity specifically about maintaining a service level? So I'm just trying to get service and service level and mandatory sort of straight in my mind.
Okay, staff.
Yes, that's correct. So in this one, you'll see that it might relate to an ongoing program. So for instance, using that first one, we've hired new staff, but that staff comes with overhead that wasn't contemplated in the initial proposal. So professional fees, training that's required to meet their professional designation, and overhead associated. We also have, in that particular area, in that same service, we have our insurance appraisals that need to continue, and we don't have sufficient funding in there. So it's a requirement of maintaining that service that costs more now than it was first contemplated. That's not the case for each one, but there's varying degrees, like you said, projects that already started and we need more funding.
Totally. So anything on page 1? Director McMahon.
Okay, fire truck replacement, engine number 1. We just replaced the fire truck at the main fire hall. Is this fire hall number 2? Or is this a second fire truck? Or what's happening?
This is the, if you go down, it's the Gibsons and District Volunteer Fire Department, fire truck replacement of engine number 1, unit 371. Staff.
Yeah, so the ladder truck was replaced. It was at the end of its useful life, and I think this is one of the pumper trucks. So it's a different type of vehicle, also end of its useful life, and it's within their asset management plan and can no longer meet the fire rating codes. So this is the same for the other fire trucks on the list.
Follow up on that one?
So how are our reserves for fire truck replacement? Because they tend to be very expensive, so just checking.
So you'll notice this one in particular for Gibson's is going to be funded by a combination because the reserves to purchase, I think the other ladder truck costs almost $1 million. So that's all part and parcel of the next discussion with all the all the emergency protective services, emergency services, as outlined in the strategic plan, was ensuring they have enough sufficient funding to meet all their equipment, bricks and mortar needs. So there are some items here too to increase reserves in some of these departments.
Okay, so if you look on the right side on this one, under funding source, it indicates most of it is coming from debt, grant, fees, etc. Well, and then we're looking at the 5-year equipment financial loan from MFA. Yeah. Director Beamish, you had a question?
Yes, I'm also looking at items 210 on the same page. I guess I have a hard time looking at, for example, the base budget increase for vehicles and repairs and maintenance without knowing what the base budget is today for repairs and maintenance. I mean, is this a significant increase? Is this a minor increase in the base budget? And I mean, same goes for the next two. Is that we're asking for an increase to the capital reserves, an increase to the training budget, all coming from taxation. But what are those budgets today? What justifies the training budget increase of $27,000? Basically for the same number of members, and there's always an annual turnover of members. So I'm just wondering what's being added to the process for those kind of costs.
It's like a percentage increase?
Sorry?
Like a percentage over the base?
Yeah, I don't know what the base is in terms of those numbers and what we're going to get for the additional 27.5.
Staff are discussing, yes?
So I do believe there's either a fire commission meeting that happened already or one that is happening soon. And typically what happens there is they discuss these more in detail. And so all of these projects that are outlined here were identified in the Protective Services, the strategic plan that was presented earlier this year. In the case of the equipment, it really identified they didn't have enough money to service the type of equipment that they had. So really, they've not had an increase there for years, and so they're now experiencing larger costs. So again, when the equipment ages, as some of their equipment here is, they need to fix it more often. So if you want a more holistic review of just the Gibson's Fire Department as to how all of these tie in, then we could get a motion to that effect and we can bring more detail.
It's just we just don't know. For example, come December 31st or January 1st, is there a surplus in that area? Or is there a deficit in that area? And or how that those costs were the budget? How the budget was spent during this year?
So I have a question for you on process. If we leave these items in, will they come back at round one? Okay, so if we take them out, they're going away. Right. If they stay in here, then those business cases will be coming forward to us at round one, and you'll get all the detail that you're looking for to be able to make the decision whether or not we're going to increase it or include it.
It's just difficult to make a decision based upon, we need 15,000 more for maintenance. Well, how much we have for maintenance, how much do we spend on maintenance, what additional maintenance is required, that's all.
And that information will be part of what comes forward at round one. Is that correct?
This particular question, in light of the Gibson's Fire Department, I could work with Matt to provide a separate report on that and provide the information requested on those initiatives that are outlined here.
Okay, are there others for other fire departments here that also need further information? Go to Director McMahon and then Director Ties.
Well, I'm back to Gibson's. First off, it sounds like we need a meeting of the Fire Commission because we're supposed to have a meeting where we review the budget, and it's not, I haven't seen one scheduled. So if somebody could do that. The other piece of information that we need if we're talking to the public is how long has it been since some of these budgets have been increased. I know in a number of cases it's been a very long time, and that's helpful for us when we're having that conversation.
Thank you. Director Ties?
Yeah, well, I think part of the reasons why we're seeing increases also is that I think the requirements for training have increased substantially over the last couple of years for the fire department. So, the people, there's a lot more emphasis on training now than there used to be, and there's also a lot more liability that's involved. So, I think that's where we're seeing some of those numbers reflected. I don't know, staff might correct me if I'm wrong, but
I think if we refer back to the report that came through by the consultants that we had, they indicated that up and down the coast, there was not a clear understanding of the level of training that each of the firefighters had. There needed to be work to determine what skills they needed to learn and make sure that they actually had the training required for the various levels that they were actually being implemented at their respective fire departments. So it was identified at that time that more funding was required in order to bring them up to that level so that everybody was aware of what level they had and that they had the sufficient training to be able to do what they needed to do. It was a safety of them and everybody else. And that information will come forward in our reports. Coming forward. CAO?
Just to add what you said, Chair, yeah, definitely. The fire services report very much provided the information and requirements for that guided the development of these budgets. So it very much followed those recommendations.
Okay, and follow up on Director McMahon's comment. It sounds like you would like to request a fire commission meeting be set up for the is it Gibson's and Area Fire Commission? Would you like to make that motion?
Does it need a motion?
Just to make sure that it gets
okay,
action.
Sure. please.
Okay, and seconded? And all those in favor? Thank you. Okay. Director Hills.
Thanks. It's 216, the gear washing. When I read hazardous material, it sounds like a safety issue or a workman's compensation rather than a business continuity service level. So I'm just, again, the context you were talking about, the fire department, which ones are base level and which ones are safety. I'm just wondering if that's truly a safety item.
Okay, before we go to the CAO on this, I'm not concerned about the category, and I don't think staff are concerned about the category at this point. If you want to have the category changed, we could have them do that. We at this point need to identify for them which ones we want to take out.
Yeah, so the context, if it's a safety item, I might be more in than out.
Okay.
So that's why I'm,
So you want more background on this one? Can staff provide that?
Well, and it's for me, it's easier to say yes if it's a absolutely safety item than if there's more discretion in it. That's where I'm trying to.
Staff?
Yes, thank you for the question. This particular one is a matter of there's no facilities within the fire hall itself, and it's the matter of efficiency of the fire chief himself taking the gear to other facilities to have it washed and cleaned.
Questions on page 1. Dr. Lee.
I guess I'm unsure about the training aspect of this. If I remember right, there was a training component for all our fire departments. So they must be coming somewhere else other than this budget to do that. Maybe it's a base budget that they get every year, and this is over and above the base budget. Is that correct? Yes.
Staff?
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, I think a more global answer to that is other aspects of other fire department budgets have been looked at in that regard, as far as what are the training requirements, the new recruits particularly draws on the training budget, and looking at past years, it's been underfunded. So this basically, the request is to bring it up to what actual expenditures have been in recent years.
Oops, sorry. Any other questions on page 1? Any items you want removed from page 1? Page 2. Yay! First, Director Rand.
Okay, I'm looking at the second item on the page, the purchase of a used light-duty truck. The used part is good because we need to be transitioning our fleet to electric. So in the interim, it makes sense to not invest in gasoline vehicles and commit ourselves for 10 or more years. I was just going to suggest that this is an area where the municipalities could also coordinate their efforts, because we all need to purchase vehicles, and I think we all need a fleet transition plan to get away from, to reduce our GHG emissions. And there may be some benefit to exploring some purchasing strategies. This is on my mind because one of my roles is I'm with the Coast Car Co-op, and we've just been researching the purchase of a lightly used light-duty truck, and we found a couple of great deals. And I have some suggestions, which I'm not going to do right now, but I'm totally happy to share where we found some good sources. And it would be great. This is a good area for collaboration, so whatever we can do to move this forward or even share some vehicles would be great.
I've made a note. Director Lee. Any other questions on items on page 2? Move on to page 3. Starts at the top with Reed Road and Elphinstone Road water main replacement. There's a lot of water projects. Director McMahon?
Oh, I have plenty of questions. So the Reed Road, Elphinstone Road water main would be part of the new Church Road well system. It says that cost savings could occur by combining the projects, which makes a lot of sense. And possibly, if we are able to obtain grant funding for the Church Road well, then maybe some of that could go into the water main. So is this $750,000 kind of the worst case estimate? Is it possible that it could be a whole lot better than that?
Staff?
Thank you for the question. We would have to upgrade these water mains regardless if we move forward with the Church Road project or not. That's why it's listed as a separate item, because these mains are in need of replacement regardless. By combining, yes, we can reduce the cost further, and it totally depends on if we would get a grant and how we would be able to do it. The combination would be the cost savings would primarily be in, for example, paving costs and just during the construction that you can put in two mains at the same time instead of that you have to do it after each other. Thank you.
Any other questions on page 3 items? Director McMahon.
Yes, I'd like to know more about sludge. How do we? What is in our sludge? I understand some of it is toxic materials. So what is the deal with our sludge and processing it, and where does it go?
I can provide the short version of a way longer conversation I can have about this. Sludge is when sediment water with some form of sediment is coming into the treatment plant, we're filtering it, and what we're doing is we're adding chemicals to increase the binding of the material, and that's being filtered out. Maybe you can recollect from the tour of the treatment plant. There were two basins. The second basin had a brown layer on top. That's ultimately what the sludge is. It's a brown layer, so it's watery mixed with sediment, and that's currently there's a pipe to our treatment facility for sludge where we just try to dry it up to the air, and that facility is completely full and is not able to. That needs to be removed, and we need to start planning on, okay, what is our future planning process for that? Thank you.
Flocculation. Yes, and we're looking at the same thing in Seashell with regards to our biosolids at our Dusty Road facility. We need to come up with another option rather than just having them build up and we have to move them out at some point. What do we do ongoingly? Yeah.
There's a collaboration piece.
The difference, this sludge has no organic material in it, almost no organic material. So it is sand with a little bit of aluminum, but it's primarily sandy, silty material.
Director Lee?
I just have to ask, is it considered pollution?
It is not to be used as sand, for example, as a fill, but there are other applications that it can be used for, but in a limited manner because there is some aluminum in it, yes.
Any other questions on this page? Director Beamish.
Just in relation to that, could it be used as landfill cover?
It's one of the things that will be researched if a feasibility study for a biocover would be undertaken next year, yes.
Any other questions on this page? Next. So at the bottom this says page 12. Page 12, Director Ties.
Yeah, the last one before subtotal A there, Dakota Ridge Recreation Service Area Piston Bully Track Replacement. Am I one? I'm one too far. I'm sorry about that. Never mind.
Director McMahon?
Okay, I'm looking at Suncoaster Trail, Part 2. We're in the planning phase right now. We're not at the construction phase. This would be presumably the completion of Part 2. I'm not... Funding sources are marked as other. I sure wouldn't want to put this forward for taxation. I'm a little concerned that we don't have a strategy for our parks and trails in terms of long-term maintenance. And I have heard from trail users that the Suncoaster Part 1 needs a lot of maintenance, which was never budgeted for. So before we commit ourselves to building the rest of the trail, I think we better look at the bigger picture there. So I in fact, assuming that this was the completion part, would want to take that one out.
Sorry, and the item here is further information about phases and a supporting funding plan will be provided through the budget process. So what you're asking is, if this stays in, you'd like to ensure that funding is also incorporated for maintenance of the existing and going forward. So you're looking at complete life cycle costs of the or take it out.
Well, we certainly need to know life cycle costs before we commit ourselves to, major new infrastructure.
Staff want to comment on that?
Thank you, Chair. So staff hear the concern and note that clearly the committee will require further information in order to make a decision about inclusion of this in a future financial plan. And staff also hear the concern about an overall plan for parks assets, and that concern is reflected in some of the other proposals that are here, and indeed asset management planning for the Park Service is contemplated as one of the next areas to be looked at corporately with a comprehensive asset management plan developed. Thank you.
Follow up? So what would you like to do with this item? Do you want to leave it in at this point, pending the further information coming forward? Did you want, yes? Okay. Got it.
So the other item is the Shirley Macy Sports Field, and we need a regional sports field strategy. I mean, from the point of view of users, it doesn't matter whether the field belongs to the school district, the town of Gibson, the district of Sea Shelter, the SCRD. And so what we want is a seamless service delivery model so that they don't have to care about that either. And I have to question whether we want to spend $1.2 million at that location. It seems to me that the field that should be upgraded is, in fact, Brothers Field next to the rec center, because it's central. It's near a high school. It's right next to the rec center. It's on a bus route. Should we not be taking a broad look at which fields we have, where they are, and where is the best place strategically to invest the money? It concerns me that the model for recreation in the SCRD seems to be that it's a service you drive to. And, until recently, even at the sports field, there weren't bike parking. It was assumed that everybody gets in their car and drives there. And that's not really the model that we're looking for going forward. If we're going to lower our GHG emissions, we should focus our attention in central locations. So I would want to take the sports field out.
I have to say, I think this is actually put in here at the board's request. When we had the delegation here, we said there was this report that was done previously, and we wanted staff to come back to us with costs of putting this forward. That's why it's on here at our request. Staff?
Thank you, Chair. And staff would confirm that that is why this is included. And this is not the only work that's coming out of the delegation and the following board directive, which I believe is on, or sorry, it's on today's agenda. Work directly related to the points that the director just raised is underway. Thank you.
So leave it in at this point?
I would prefer to take it out at this point because I don't think we're going to have a strategy, but I defer to staff.
Okay. Staff?
I just wanted to make a comment, Chair, from process perspective. When a project such as the Suncoaster or potentially the Fields, which we still haven't determined yet, is fully funded by grants, I'll use some of the water projects in past years where we had submitted an application, but we didn't actually adopt. You would see the business case, but you wouldn't actually put it in the financial plan until you found out the funding source. So this would just bring the information for more clarity and understanding. But again, if it's to be funded 100% by a grant, we would never put it in the financial plan until we knew the results of the grant.
So in other words, leave it in at this point. We won't necessarily go forward. We won't go forward if it's taxation funds that would be required. But if we moved it forward, we would actually have it shovel ready so that if grants are available, we could actually apply for grant.
Yeah, okay, that might be the case. It's hard when there's so many of these. Yeah.
Director Pratt.
And I would support keeping it in. There's also, I know there's other options with looking at the capital expenditure and capital fundraising, because I know the committee is very committed. The Fields Committee is very committed to making sure that there's funds for this. So there might be additional opportunities beyond grants. So I think we should really keep it in.
Director Van.
So long as there is a long-term maintenance plan associated with this, it also comes with a funding source.
Point taken.
Okay, any other questions on that page? Next page, last of this category, starts at the top with sports field equipment deep aerator. Director Tice.
Okay, that was mine. I accidentally flipped to. Anyway, Dakota Ridge Recreation Service Area, piston bully track replacement. I've chatted with some of the volunteers up there, and the piston bully is great, but it's a very expensive machine to maintain and have up there. And apparently there's some crucial pieces missing to having either the snowmobile do more of the grooming than the piston bully, which would reduce the wear and tear on this piston bully. So I'm just wondering if this is something that we want to look at, so that we use the piston bully less and a cheaper snowmobile more, so that the wear and tear on the piston bully is decreases.
Staff want to comment on that one?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Staff have included under, I think it's under low cost, high impact, a sort of omnibus minor capital investments in Dakota Ridge as an opportunity to strengthen the service in a way that hasn't been done for a few years, and included in there is snowmobile grooming equipment for exactly the reasons that the director notes. The track replacement is akin to replacing a tire on a car, a very expensive tire, mind you, but through our annual maintenance review of the piston bully, it's been identified that one of the tires is completely bald, so to speak, and the others will soon be on their way out. And in order to make the best use of the asset, fresh tires are needed. Thanks.
I'm going to point out one item before I go to Director Hiltz. Second item on this page, Community Parks, establishment of a parks capital budget ongoing. this would be addressing Director McMahon's comments around ongoing asset management planning and maintenance. Director Hiltz.
Just a comment on the piston bullet. It sounds like it's imminent asset failure, essentially, that the wheels are coming off the bus, kind of. Sounds like. A question about the deep aerator, and we're back to the sharing of equipment between municipalities. Is there another deep aerator in a local government that's available now? Do we know this?
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. No, nobody on the coast has a deep aerator, and so local governments and field managers that are doing deep aeration, which not all are buying in the service once a year, which is less than has been recommended by some turf consultants. And while there has been some collaborative buying, trying to get equipment on coast to do a bunch of fields at once, for a variety of reasons, that doesn't always work. And so through staff-to-staff conversations and trying to identify the key opportunities for equipment investments that would benefit the entire coast, the aerator has been identified as one, and SCRD has included that here. And I understand that District of Sechelt is contemplating a new type of seeder that could, again, be a possibly shared asset for the benefit of all fields on the coast. And the annual cost just to SCRD to buy in aeration services is over $10,000.
Director Moran?
That sounds good, by the way. I just wanted to flag to your attention under community parks that I've had a lot of people from Wood Creek Park ask me about Whispering Firs. The infrastructure in that park, like the fitness circuit and stuff, is ancient, and they like a refresh on that park, so I just wanted to draw it to your attention that they're concerned about redoing that park.
Director Beamish?
Yeah, I'd just like to come back in the whole parks issue, but primarily the sports fields. Presentations we received and the correspondence we received relative to the sports fields seems to suggest that we are a bit of an embarrassment to our local users because of the condition, relative to the condition in some very other communities that have much larger budgets and a much larger density of use and potential, I would say, for increased revenues over and above which we could actually acquire. And I wonder if that could be part of the study that we're doing. You know, we need to compare apples to oranges and say that if you want to be like North Vancouver, we need to have the revenues in North Vancouver to be able to pay for our parks. The park's a park. It's a piece of a field that sits there. It's an asset. It's going to cost as much to maintain in North Vancouver as it is to maintain here. It's just the revenue streams are going to be completely different, and the opportunities to pay for that. What would we have to do to bring our budgets and our revenue streams up in terms of fees to be able to maintain at the same level as North Vancouver or West Vancouver or Squamish, for example? I think the public needs to understand that's a limitation that we have. We simply don't have that same capacity for revenue without a significant step forward in that area. So it's part of the study I think we should be looking at when we're looking at these costs.
Any other comments on this category before we move to the board's strategic and corporate goals? We have a number of pages to get through yet, and I'm aware that we actually have a delegation sitting in the other room that is to present to us. I'm wondering if we should go in camera, bring them in and let them do their delegation, their presentation, and then break for lunch, go into our corporate or our board meeting, and then come back and finish this off after.
Just a question, maybe to staff.
Yeah.
Are there any items on today's CAS agenda that you needed to go through the board meeting today?
Good point.
To answer the question, yes, there is an item. May I make an alternative suggestion, subject to the availability of our presenters, and given the availability of our CFO, is to carry on with the budget and perhaps have the in-camera over lunch and have the presentation during the lunch.
Ed?
Are there other reports that you'd want to refer to another meeting?
Oh, I'm just concerned about the time. I mean, we're
Yeah, no,
quarter
I
after 12,
understand.
right? That's all.
Annex B.
Yeah. Yeah, the rest of them probably won't take that long once we get through this one. Should we keep going? Okay, next category, board strategic and corporate goals. So we have 2 at the bottom of the page. Any questions on those 2? Next, page 14. So the one right at the top is the one that is at the board's request. Director Lee? First Nations Cultural, that one? Oh, yes, okay. Yes? Question? Any questions about it? Okay. Director Ties?
I did have a question on the first page, 312, maintenance facility fleet, increased fleet mechanic. And I know that mechanics are hard to come by, and I'm wondering if staff has thought about, rather than hiring one hard-to-find full-time experienced mechanic, to start some sort of apprenticeship program and actually be a training facility for maybe hiring 2 apprentices rather than 1 full-timer.
Staff?
Thank you for the question. And yes, I agree with the comments by the director that fleet mechanics can be hard to find. However, currently we have somebody on staff as a bus driver who is fully qualified to, and sometimes already pitching in as our mechanic. And this position, and that person is also qualified, and that's why we're using him at the moment. He's also qualified to do the repairs and maintenance and inspection on our fire trucks. So that's another reason why having a full-time mechanic on staff that can do that is an asset, and it's actually essential for the organization.
Director McMahon?
In some cases, like if we have a mechanic, it actually ends up saving us money, I presume. But we don't. Is there any way to capture that, if you see what I mean? It sounds like a really good idea, and it makes a lot of sense, and we're better, if we better manage our assets, they last longer. But I don't know if there's any way to see in the budget process of what the potential savings are.
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. Very quickly, this is a recovering function. So it's an internal service that charges out to the various services. So from a financial impact, in the case of the fire department where they have increased their maintenance budget, this is how this gets paid for. But what we're saying is instead of going off coast to get these fire truck service, let's do it internally.
Okay. Answer your question? Okay. I'm going to go back up to the communications manager because I know you want that brought up. So one of the strategic goals that we've set as a board is very important is community engagement. We currently at the regional district do not have a communications manager. We don't have somebody here who actually would put together the communication strategies to be proactive in dealing with any of the issues or items going forward. We're going to have lots of them coming up, water being a big one. But, I mean, looking at this budget and all the items that are in here that are, there's necessity for a lot of these things. We need to move them forward. Another big one is going to be the space. These are high-cost items that we need the community to understand so that we have their support in moving forward. That would be the job of the communications manager, to put together the communications plan to ensure that the community is aware and has the avenues for us to get information out, for them to ask the questions back and forth to ensure we have community support for our initiatives moving forward. McMahon?
Would this position be part of the senior management team?
Staff?
Thank you for the question. There's a number of items regarding the organization that relate to that, and I would prefer to have that discussion with the board separately.
Director Lee, did you have a question, comment?
I think Mark just answered my question. We maybe want to talk about it separately. And I was thinking more along the duties of this person, so we hire the right person.
Okay, any other questions on page 14? Director Hilt.
Yeah, food waste, last one on the page 350. In the reports that have come so far, I'm still not clear who's actually going to use, like how many people are actually going to use this, considering we're going to curbside in the electoral areas except A. So I don't get a sense of the uptake of this service. So it's almost equivalent to our curbside in terms of a cost. It's about 1/2, I think, of the total cost. So if something can come forward from staff about kind of more details about who are actually the target users of the service. That's kind of where I'm trying to, whether that'll be in the business case but I want specifically that kind of information.
Okay, staff clear on that one?
Thank you for the question. In terms of the users, of the information provided at the committee, that's about what we have currently available. The only other alternative to get more insight in what the potential users would be to undertake kind of survey. But that I think it will be not beneficial to do the survey while the organics program is not implemented and broadly shared as well. So yeah, this is as per the direction of the board. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Any other questions, Director McMahon?
Same item. I'm thinking this might be a candidate to be deferred. Maybe not just taken off altogether, but until we have done a bunch of other things, this is not my highest priority. I think we've got other things.
Any other questions on this page? Any items you want taken out? Next page, page 15. Director Ties.
Well, this might land me with some hot water, but 365 and 366, if we're looking at doing a master plan update on water, I'd like to address the one that's broken and not the two that are working fine. So spending $200,000 on updating a strategic water plan on two systems that currently have not as many issues as the one we have doesn't really seem to make sense to me. That being said, of course we need one eventually, but I think right now there are bigger fish to fry.
I have a follow-up question on that. This is being funded from reserves, right? So the money is sitting there waiting to do this. Is this an internal project, or would this be outsourced? Given I'm looking at staff resources and staff.
Thank you for the question. There are two questions here. One is why now, and the other one is how to execute it. The why now is that the strategic plan indicates that the desire to update all master plans or all strategic water plans for all water service areas. These two are outdated, as well as we know that for both systems, north and south, there's maybe not a water supply deficit, but the infrastructure in, especially the water mains in those areas, are in need of, there's a significant upgrades required there. Next year, there's also scheduled to do the asset management plan for North and South Pender, and updating the water plan at the same time and in conjunction would really be beneficial. The update to the comprehensive regional water plan for the regional water system is currently scheduled for 2021 and 2022, also parallel to the development of asset management plans for that water system. So the combination of the asset management plan development with the strategic water plan development is really what's driving that these two systems are now scheduled to be, are proposed to be undertaken next year. In terms of execution, part of the work required for a strategic water plan is modeling, is an inventory of all the assets, a modeling of all the assets, a modeling of flows, of fire flows, and to identify where potential pressure or flow issues are within the system. That's the kind of work that we would outsource, the actual writing of the plan itself and the analysis itself of the issues. That's what we would do in-house. And our resources referred separately in this document that will be required to undertake that work in-house. Otherwise, we would need to outsource also the actual drafting of the document itself.
I think the rest of the projects on here with regards to water, regional water service, we've got meter installation, District of Sechelt, SIGD, it says long-term loan. Hopefully there's some grants potentially we could get there. Dusty Road and or Grey Creek investigation, additional work around Church Road, the Eastbourne water system, development phase 1 for the water reservoir, and our conservation, water supply and conservation public engagement in 2020. Okay, next page. Yep, go ahead, Director Lee.
I am in favor of doing the study for North and South Pender, but I'm trying to figure out the fit with the comprehensive water supply, our watershed protection projects we got going, and our long-term water sourcing. I understand that those ones are outside of the work we're going to do with this, and this will be, Area A will be included in the discussion as it goes forward. Under separate projects on those issues. Am I close to right?
So are you asking if we do these, will you still, these are separate, and will they still all be included in the water governance question and conversations that we're having?
Yes.
Yes. Answer is yes. Okay. Thank you. Next page. New or expansion of water conservation rebate programs. Is that the right page? Yes. Anything on this page? Director Ties.
The emergency water storage tanks, do we need to buy these 1,000 gallon tanks, or I'm wondering if there's some more creative ways of getting those tanks. I know there's those 1,000 liter tanks that are by the water treatment plant that are much cheaper than having to buy a 1,000-gallon tank, and maybe those could be ferried around. Or if we do have to buy those 1,000-gallon tanks, when they're not being used as emergency water supplies, can they be used as water storage for field irrigation, for example, like at Cliff Kilker or Shirley Macy, so that if we have a pump connected to them, then that way we actually save some water and use those 1,000 gallons usefully. Just some thoughts.
Staff?
The answer to the question is yes. The intent is to purchase large transportable tanks so that we can use them for different services throughout the year where needed. If it's a filling of the arena during stage 4 water supply restrictions, or irrigation of the field earlier in the summer, or during a real emergency. So we have the tanks so we can move them around and use them where fit.
Director Hill.
And just following up on the tanks, so the intent is to be able to move these things when they're full of water or when they haven't got water in them?
The intent is to be able to move them around without water and have one on a trailer that we can move around full with water. Thank you.
And note on this page we have 2 that are TBD with amount. One is the Water Conservation Rebate Program. Need some more thought put into that one, and the Water Governance Program as well. Both do not have dollars associated with them. I am pleased to see the software, the water meter data analytics information on here. Thank you. Director Lee.
Can I get a general idea of when it says user fees, how that works for things like shared tanks, or is that to be determined?
Staff?
To be determined.
Director Hill.
I'm just going to, the metering software. So when these original projects were contemplated, this was never contemplated as part of the projects, as in terms of the support staff and the software. It was just like put the meter in and don't think about what we're going to do with them. Is that kind of how the project was conceived? It just seems like we're kind of chasing our tails here, kind of like we put the bus going forward, but we didn't put the wheels on it, right? It seems.
Staff?
I like the analogy with the bus, but in this case, they were contemplated at that time, but never brought forward as a budget proposal, because the intent was always we first install all the meters all over the coast, and then we start developing the entire program around it. Thank you.
Director Lee.
One of the motivations for installing meters in the well, for sure in the Pender Harbor area, was the fact that we wouldn't get other grants unless we accepted this grant. And so that really helped the public motivation in accepting water meters. Is that concept still in force for the SIGD and the other areas without meters?
Staff?
Thank you for the question. As referenced earlier this year in other reports, most current federal and provincial infrastructure-related grants related to water supply are expecting water meters to be installed.
Any other questions on this page? Director Beamish.
Yeah, actually, the bottom of this page and the top of the next page, the FTEs that are identified here, there's 3 separate FTEs. Firstly, dealing with the one on page 16, It's identified as regional service participants, which I see is to the exclusion of Gibson's. However, within the description, it identifies solid waste and transit as possible other themes. And similarly, fairly similar description to the top of page 17. So I'm just wondering if that should be all. And then again, it comes down to the question: how do we cover those costs from user fees for those three positions?
Over to you.
I think the answer to the last question is the work plan, the detailed work plan for these positions still have to be developed. And based on those work plans, we can do an allocation of their time to different functions, and so the user fees and associated with them. In terms of should regional be changed to all, given that there is solid waste and transit included in the description, I think the answer is yes.
I know we're looking at adding some additional staff, but I think one of the things that we recognize at this table is that our current staff are at a level where they're pretty much tapped out with keeping up with the day-to-day and the short-term projects that are on our list. These are looking at where do we go forward? What's the vision? And how do we then implement and plan for that? And it is costly. We're looking at 3 new staff members. But until we have that vision, that plan, we can't actually do any of these planning pieces, and we're always playing catch-up. So it's costly, but I think it's a necessary resource. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to comment further. I think related to that is earlier in the agenda we talked about all the carry forwards, and I think that's indicative of the shortfall in person hours to actually accomplish what we're doing already. So,
any other questions on that page? Page 16 in the printed copy. Move to page 17. Any questions? Director McMahon.
Well, the last item on the page, changing the boardroom around so that we don't have the projector shining in our eyes, it sounds like a great idea, and I might suggest looking at any other changes that can be made without a lot of cost to make this room more flexible for multi-purposes, because it's not just the boardroom, it's used for other kinds of meetings and so forth. And so if there's anything that we can do to make it a little more multifunctional, that would be great.
Anything else on this page? Director Beamish.
I guess it's just a comment, thinking out loud here, but seeing like those 3 positions were identified really is manage the strategic plan in a lot of sense. And I'm wondering how we can use those resources more regionally beyond simply the regional district structure. I mean, it doesn't make sense for the town of Gibson's to hire somebody to manage a strategic plan. We're 5,000 people, or Seashell. We seem to have some overlapping interests here. I'm just wondering how those interests can be shared between all levels of government with resources that we're all paying for through the regional district. I'm just wondering how much integration we can do at that level. It's a challenge, but I just wonder if we are adding quite a bit of capacity here. We're not adding similar capacity, I don't expect, at the municipal level, and so that but we have similar demands. I'm just wondering if there's some way that those can be a resource to everybody, that's all. Just out loud, I was just wondering.
Looking at what the job description or what's identified in here, solid waste and transit and water, I think at this point they're going to have their hands full. down the road, maybe. I mean, but that's, I mean, as we pursue other projects and as we continue to work collaboratively across the coast, those kinds of things can be engaged in, and we can look at sharing resources. Any other questions on page 17? Page 18. So note our category has changed. This is low cost, high value, right? So the 10,000 for this room to make it more functional. Any others on the next page? I like the automatic garage door openers for the fire department. Nothing on that page. Next page. 2 more items. There's your Dakota Ridge. Director Ties.
I'm looking into 370 Regional Water Service Chapman Water Treatment Plant hot water upgrade, and I'm wondering what is the demand for hot water what is the demand for for hot water at the water treatment plant? Is it only like staff showers, or do we need fairly high amounts? And is there a way that maybe we could preheat with solar or have hot water on demand? I don't think there's natural gas up there, but just some ideas of reducing the energy demands up there.
Staff?
Thank you very much. We have natural gas at the treatment plant. And we currently have a system in place with boilers, which are about 15 years old now, that's actually oversized to what we currently need. We primarily need hot water there for safety purposes, in case we need, because of the chemicals we work with, we need hot water to be on site, and we need sometimes hot water to dilute some of the chemicals to clean the tanks. So the amount actually that we need is way less than the infrastructure we have currently available. So this money would allow us to replace the aged infrastructure that is exposing risk for leakages, and replace it with more smaller size infrastructure like we have all in our households. Thank you.
Yeah, so it sounds like this is like an intermittent demand for hot water. So I'm thinking hot water on demand might be something that would certainly lend itself in this scenario. So
that's correct, and that will be looked at as well as what is actually, will it be continue to be natural gas or another mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Director Hiltz and then Director Command.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, number 370, the excavator purchase. I'm just wondering how are the services arranged now for when you need excavator service?
Staff.
We currently don't have an excavator, so we contract everything out. So we hire contractors to do excavating work for us at the moment.
So follow up to that, do we have staff who are actually trained on, that could actually run this?
We have several staff that are trained and experienced in running small excavators.
Okay, Director McMahon?
I was just back to the hot water. I mean, we're trying to transition off fossil fuels. So, in any case, when we're adding new infrastructure, if we can look at all the options and build in the GHG component with the decision. Thanks.
Any other comments, questions on this page? We're at the final page. We have 2 items on here. Any questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to direct you to page 191. There are some recommendations on that page.
Did we take anything out?
No. So on page 191, recommendation that the report titled 2019 Carry Forwards and 2020 Proposed Initiatives be received, and that the recommended carry forward projects and associated funding be included in the 2020-2024 financial plan, and that Sunshine Coast Arena Water Efficiency Plan project be canceled, and that staff be authorized to proceed with carry forward projects prior to adoption of the 2020-2024 financial plan. Would you like to move that? Okay, moved and seconded. Comment.
First, the numbers are daunting, but I really want to thank staff for bringing all of these forward. I know a lot of them have been ones that have been on the wish list for a long time, and as much as it is a daunting list. I know I'll speak for the board and just say thank you for not bubble wrapping us on this, and it's good to have all of the information. And look at where we need to be in order to get where we need to go. So thank you for that.
Director Gourmand?
Yeah, we appreciate the long-term thinking, because we shouldn't have to be wondering at this stage what to do with the sludge that we've been producing for 20 years. Surely that should have been baked into the plan right at the beginning. So we've got a lot of catch-up to do.
Any other comments? All right, let's move on to Annex D. Did we vote? Sorry, all in favor? Sorry. Thank you. Okay. Comment?
Just going to say, in the spirit of time, because we do have that, we're at 12:45. We have a board meeting at 1:30, and still, I'm wondering if we should go to that item that we need to get on the agenda for the board today. If the CAO could, no? It's, okay. All right. I'm wondering if maybe there was anything else that we needed to deal with right now, or if we should just in order to give us a bit of a break and deal with our in-camera.
I'm wondering about item 10. Item 10 and item...
Standing dock.
Yeah.
Item 16.
Item 16, yeah. Does item 10 need to come to board today?
Staff would invite the board's consideration of their comfort level with taking it to board today. That recommendation wasn't included in the report, but as noted in the report, the item does have some time sensitivity to it.
Okay. So, yes. Hang on one second. No, we're going to do number 16 first, and then we'll do number 10, because number 10, Director Ties needs to recuse himself. So let's look at number 16, which is Annex N. This is Remembrance Day wreaths. So we'd like to look at who is going to lay the wreaths at the different legions. Director Ties?
I have already volunteered myself for the Roberts Creek Legion.
Okay, Roberts Creek. Gibson's? Okay, are you going to put... Okay, so Director Hiltz is doing Gambier. Do you want to do Gibson's? No? Okay. Okay, so David Kroll. So you would do... You'll do Town of Gibson's, and Director Kroll will do the SCRD. So that's Gibson's, Pender Harbor, Director Lee. We've got Roberts Creek, Seashell Legion, Director Pratt, and Gambier we've got Director Hiltz. Okay, motion to that effect.
So moved, and that it goes to the board this afternoon because our next board meeting isn't until November 12th.
Perfect. Okay. Seconder for that? Seconded? All in favor? Thank you. Okay, and now we'll have Director Ties recuse himself. You can probably prep our person in there too and tell him we'll be there shortly. So item number 10, this is Annex H. Sorry, I just have to find it in my calendar, in my thing here. Okay, do we need staff to speak to this? Do you want to speak to it? Okay.
I'd just say, I guess, that the report hopefully is self-explanatory, but please answer any questions.
Dr. McMahon?
I only have just a brief comment that I know that the ports were reviewed not that many years ago, but my recollection is that the review did not include the impacts of climate change. So I think sometime in the future, we do need to review the whole port strategy because the costs are phenomenal.
Okay, would someone like to make the recommendations as presented with the addition that it go to board this afternoon? So moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And Director Hiltz?
I'd request staff bring some images for us so we could actually see what the collision impact is. So whether it's easy to do for staff just to speaking to it, Director McMahon is talking about, we need to kind of understand what these facilities look like. So I'll leave it to staff if that's a couple-minute thing or we can defer that.
Sorry? There's 3 slides available?
Staff are happy to share them now or provide them as a follow-up, as the chair prefers.
Can you just email them out to us?
He can. It was also for media to
Sophie
see what these things look like. So it was on behalf of.
Would you like a copy, Sophie? Okay. Email them out to us. Okay, so then, to staff, how would you like us to deal with the rest of the items on this agenda?
I have to catch ferry.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things are just for information. The corporate variance does have sort of a little modification to aligning operation and capital reserves.
Yes.
So the rest are pretty self-explanatory. You can have your board meeting and then you can re-adjourn to corporate services if you like. The alternative, that's I think the best alternative.
Okay.
To make another suggestion.
Yes.
The ones that are straight kind of received for information is to do so if the board is comfortable with that.
We've already done that.
The committee is comfortable with that, and have the further discussion at the actual board meeting they come forward to, if there's any questions.
Okay.
Just receive them all.
Okay, so we can look at that to see if there's anything that needs to come forward to that.
So I mean that's a good suggestion because then it means you don't really have to. You just receive them all, and
we have received them already.
But there's a couple that do need votes. I think the corporate variance needs a vote.
Yes, and the green
the
waste
rest
one.
are receipt for information.
The green waste one, you want some.
The green waste you'd have to provide, but staff could also just come back as part of the green waste tender for that.
Yes, and the bursary one.
The bursary report.
On the North Thormond B.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we could add those. So we'll work on that to add them to the board agenda. And then we need to go in camera.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify that the reports will go forward to be considered at the board, the ones that we've just identified here, be added to the board agenda as an amended item.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like a motion to that effect?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, it's moved. So we'll identify that specifically after we finish this part. But we are going to move the items that require board direction to the board meeting and be added to the agenda for this afternoon. And you've moved that? Seconded? All in favor? Thank you. Okay, so now I'd like a motion to go in camera under Section 91K of the Community Charter. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And Sophie, any questions?
I guess
We're going to head in there.
the one for now is with the water meter installation. Just it looks like the cost is $7 million, and just wanted to confirm that that amount hasn't changed. Because I recall, like the AAP that had it placed in AAP, I believe it was a $6 million was the proposal for long-term loan. So I just want to make sure I was understood.
I think staff can respond to that one.
In May, a report was presented at the May Infrastructure Services meeting that had a value of 6.6. This value is 7.0 to allow for any increases and change the market conditions and inflationary changes. That's why it's currently listed as 7 million.
Any other questions? Thank you. All right, so we're going to go next door and have some lunch and other things, and then come back for 1:30. Thank you.